Chapter 697. Mo Jingshan abruptly threw his cell phone aside and held Jin Wan's hand hard. He could clearly feel the faint movement of her fingers in his palm. Before he hung up the phone, Atuta's adoptive father's voice rang. "Mr. Control, we can negotiate." "Please." Mo Jingshan ignored the phone call and hung up. He looked at the woman on the bed whose eyes were still closed and called her in a low voice, "Nuan Nuan." Jin Wan's hand moved twice in his palm as if it was conscious. Although the movement was weak, it was 1,000 times better than the state she had been in for the past few days when she seemed to be unconscious and had no reaction at all. Mo Jingshan ordered someone to call Dr. Wendell. Dr. Wendell did a series of examinations on Jin Wan and then nodded with relief. Miss G's vitality and willpower have always been in her subconscious. She didn't give up. Fortunately, her injury is not fatal. As long as she continues to recuperate for a while, her internal and external injuries will be fine, and there won't be any sequelae. However, although the operation went well, there is no guarantee that the bleeding in some blood vessels will be completely cured. We still can't predict when she will wake up in the short term, but her body has regained consciousness. Even if she doesn't wake up, when she recovers to a certain extent, she can be taken out to bask in the sun every day to enhance her immunity and adjust her body to a healthy state. You mean we still can't predict when she will wake up in the short term? Mo Jingshan frowned. It means that it's up to Miss G to decide when she will wake up and whether she will be affected in all aspects after she wakes up. Dr. Qin should have already told you that although this kind of subarachnoid hemorrhage in the head is not fatal, this kind of hemorrhage will oppress the brain nerves and may affect her state of consciousness after she wakes up. But still, we'll only know after she wakes up. Qin Siding did say that this kind of hemorrhage was likely to affect her intelligence and consciousness for a period of time, and she would often have headaches if the remaining blood outside the blood vessels was not absorbed by herself. But the question now was, when would she wake up? When Dr. Wendell left, Mo Jingshan looked at her quiet and motionless fingers and habitually held her hand again. In less than a month of suffering, he was so exhausted. If it were Jin Wan 3 years ago, she wouldn't even be able to see his face for 2 whole months. When he finally woke up, she was faced with a man she could no longer approach. What kind of despair and heartache must she have felt at that time, yet she persisted by his side for such a long time. The hysteria in her heart was forcibly suppressed by her deliberate calmness on the surface. For the first time, Mo Jingshan began to doubt everything he had done for her good. He would rather start all over again than hold her tightly in his arms when he opened his eyes 3 years ago. The man lowered his head and kissed her fingers, his hoarse voice low and deep. "It's all my fault." A month later, the direct flight from Los Angeles to High City landed at High City Airport. Mo Jingshan carried Jin Wan out of the airport and then gently put her into the car. Facing the woman who had been motionless with her eyes closed, he whispered in a comforting tone, "Good girl, let's go home. We've been flying for more than 10 hours. We need to go to Qin Siding's hospital for a checkup first. If you're okay, we'll go back to the U Garden. I've asked Auntie Chin and the others to go back. Everyone will accompany you." He held her in the car. Shen Mu, who came to pick them up, didn't say a word and drove away from the airport. Jin Wan didn't resist or move in Mo Jingshan's arms. Even a few days before returning to High City, Dr. Wendell said she had recovered a lot of consciousness, but she hadn't woken up yet. Although the gunshot wound had healed, it was her internal organs that were seriously damaged. She couldn't do too much exercise and had to rest quietly for at least a few months. Gunshot wounds were not child's play. Whether it was a member of a Western war-torn country or a member of 11 base on a mission, the chance of survival after being hit by a bullet was very small. Jin Wan's wound was almost fatal. It was a miracle that she could survive. Everything took time. During this waiting time, staying in the cold hospital in Los Angeles was not the most comfortable place for Jean Wan. It was better to go back to High City. It was better to let her go back to her favorite place and be accompanied and taken care of by the people closest to her, most trusted, and most familiar. When they returned to the Yew Garden, Auntie Chin and the others were already waiting. Seeing Mo Jingshan carrying Jean Wan out of the car, she hurriedly came up to greet them. Mr. Mo, Madam. Before being invited back to the Yew Garden, Auntie Chin had carefully asked about Jean Wan. When she learned that Jean Wan had been seriously injured in Los Angeles and had been in a coma for more than a month, she had been worried. Now she finally saw Jean Wan, but she just let Mo Jingshan hold her, motionless, as if she didn't have any reaction. Auntie Chen's eyes instantly turned red. Madam, Mo Jingshan didn't speak but walked in with Jean Wan in his arms. The villa, the manor, and the interior decoration of the Yew Garden had all changed, but it looked more suitable for the two of them than before. Auntie Chen and the other servants hurriedly followed them in. Mo Jingshan put Jean Wan on the sofa and ran his fingers through her long hair. Then, she sat motionlessly on the sofa. He squatted in front of her and held her hand in his palm. Nwan, let's go home. After Jean Wan was brought back to High City, because Auntie Chin and the others were taking care of her, Mo Jingshan hadn't been involved in the company's affairs for nearly 2 months and finally began to put them back on the agenda. However, he came home on time every day and didn't attend any social events in person, leaving them all to his subordinates. Every night, he slept in the same master bedroom with Jean Wan. During the day, Auntie Chen and the servants fed her on time, and at night, Mo Jingshan fed her water and took care of her personally. Even if she didn't wake up, he wouldn't let her suffer at all. Ji Hongwen and Xiao Xinjuan came to visit separately, but they were both blocked by Auntie Chin. Without Mo Jingshan's permission, no one could go in and disturb Jean Wan. For many days, only Qin Siding, as a doctor, could enter the Yew Garden occasionally, but most of the time, he came to check on Jean Wan to confirm her recovery. Other than him, no one else had the chance to approach the Yew Garden. Chapter 698. Shine Group, which had resumed for 2 weeks because of CEO Mo's return, was holding a high-level meeting. The meeting was still going on, and the department head was pointing to the recently enlarged PowerPoint presentation in front of the screen in front of him to report work. Although CEO Mo was back, everyone could feel that the work atmosphere in the company was much more depressed. Almost everyone worked in a dangerous environment every day. Special Assistant Shin had told all the departments to go to the Deputy CEO's assistant and secretary's office first if they had any problems, and to let the subordinates solve the problems first. They should try not to disturb CEO Mo or go directly to the CEO's office. When the meeting was about to end, Mo Jingshan's cell phone on the conference table began to vibrate. Mo Jingshan glanced at the caller ID. Usually, if it was an unimportant call, Mo Jingshan wouldn't pick it up during the company's high-level meeting, but when he saw it was from the Yew Garden, he picked up the phone and picked it up. Mr. Mo, Madam is awake. Even though Auntie Chin briefly explained the situation on the phone, Yew Garden was in a mess that Mo Jingshan didn't expect at all. Madam, come out. No one here will hurt you. Don't be afraid. I'm Auntie Chin, Auntie Chin. Do you remember me? Madam, it's too stuffy in the wardrobe. Come out, Mrs. Mo, this is your home. Don't be afraid. Come out. Auntie Chen and several servants all stood outside the wardrobe in the master bedroom, facing the closed wardrobe door, and kept shouting nervously and worriedly at the wardrobe. Madam will really suffocate if she goes on like this. Auntie Chen, let's open the door, a servant whispered. Auntie Chen hesitated and reached out to open the wardrobe door. However, as soon as the door was opened, Jean Wan, who was curled up in the wardrobe, buried her head in her knees and hugged herself tightly as if she had been greatly frightened. Seeing her like this, Auntie Chen bent down to coax her. "Madam, get out, get out, get out." Jean Wan refused to look up, shrank her neck, and shouted in a muffled voice. Auntie Chen had no choice. Fearing that she would really be frightened, she hurriedly took 2 steps back. Dr. Qin had said that if Jean Wan woke up one day, she might not be in a good state of mind, so they should be mentally prepared. Although they were mentally prepared, no one expected Madame to be like this. Seeing Jean Wan's shoulders trembling, Auntie Chen had to close the wardrobe door again, but she carefully put a towel in the middle to make the gap between the wardrobe doors wider, lest Jean Wan really suffocate inside. Less than 20 minutes after the call, Mo Jingshan, who was in the Shine Group's office building dozens of miles away, rushed back. When he entered the bedroom, he saw the mess on the floor. The quilt and pillows were thrown to the ground, and most of the things on the bedside table and table were on the ground. Water was spilled all over the carpet. Several servants and Auntie Chen were gathered around the wardrobe door. Mo Jingshan's eyes were fixed on the wardrobe. "Mr. Mo, you're back." After Madame woke up, she didn't recognize anyone and was very scared. "We fed her water and food, but she didn't want to eat or drink, and the medicine and water were all knocked over. No matter what we said, she wouldn't listen. Then she hid in the wardrobe alone and wouldn't come out no matter how we called her." Seeing Mo Jingshan come back, the servant hurriedly turned to him as if asking for help. Mo Jingshan quickly walked to the wardrobe door. The moment he opened it, he saw that Jean Wan, who had been unconscious for a long time, could finally sit up on her own, but at this moment, she was like a helpless and ignorant child, terrified of everything around her, curled up in the corner of the wardrobe, trembling all over. "Nuan Nuan." Mo Jingshan bent down to carry her out, but when Jean Wan heard someone open the wardrobe door to talk to her, she was even more frightened and shrank into the corner of the wardrobe. "Jean Wan, it's me." Mo Jingshan had been mentally prepared because of Qin Siding's repeated reminders, but now she looked like she was not just mentally affected. Seeing that she had been hiding and that Auntie Chen had said on the phone that she had been hiding in the cabinet for almost an hour and refused to come out, Mo Jingshan turned his head and ordered, "Call Dr. Qin over." At the same time, the man put his long arm in and picked up Jean Wan, who was almost curled up into a ball. As she struggled and screamed in his arms, he held her firmly in his arms and turned to put her on the bed. Jean Wan hurriedly withdrew from his arms, but Mo Jingshan pulled the quilt that Auntie Chen hurriedly picked up from the carpet and wrapped it around her thin pajamas, pressed her into his arms, and patted her back comfortingly. "Don't be afraid. This is the Yew Garden. There's no danger. We're all here with you. Don't be afraid, okay?" Jean Wan didn't know if it was because Mo Jingshan's clear and clean smell made her feel familiar, or because of his voice or his words that comforted her, but Jean Wan gradually softened in his arms. Mo Jingshan looked down at her still pale little face, raised his hand to touch her face, and said lovingly, "No matter what you're afraid of, no one here will hurt you. Trust me, be good." Jean Wan took a few quick breaths in his arms and clenched her hands into fists. After a long time, she shrank into his arms and said hoarsely as if she had been wronged, "Where is the Yew Garden?" Mo Jingshan's eyelids twitched because of her words. The other servants had gone out, and only Auntie Chen stood by the bed and looked at them worriedly. Mo Jingshan held Jean Wan's chin with one hand and looked at her helpless eyes. "Don't you remember?" Jean Wan looked at him blankly and subconsciously raised her hand to grab the collar of his shirt. She stared at his face for a long time before saying, "I think I've seen you before, but what's your name?" Her tone sounded different from usual. Her confused and puzzled expression made Mo Jingshan's mood fall to the bottom of the valley. Dr. Qin rushed over after receiving the call. When he arrived, he saw Jean Wan curled up in Mo Jingshan's arms. Except for Mo Jingshan, she would hide behind him if anyone else came near. Chapter 699. Hearing that Dr. Chin said he could definitely cure her, Auntie Chin breathed a sigh of relief. That's good. Madam has suffered so much and finally woken up. Please don't have any other problems. As long as she can be cured, we'll cooperate with you in any way. Auntie Chin said and looked at Jean Wan, who seemed to think Mo Jingshan looked familiar. She curled up in Mo Jingshan's arms and didn't even look at the others. It was clear that no matter who she looked at, there was only fear in her eyes, except for Mo Jingshan. It could be as short as a week, or as long as half a year. It would be fine if Madam could continue to trust and rely on Mr. Mo during this period of time. Qin Sighting saw that Jean Wan was no longer paying attention to the others by the bed, or her attention was easily attracted by some small things. She was playing with the silver-gray buttons on Mo Jingshan's shirt collar. Mo Jingshan looked down at her and didn't stop her from playing, but tightened his arms around her waist and raised his eyes. Jean Wan's condition was indeed beyond everyone's expectation, but when Qin Sighting learned the location of Jean Wan's injury, he asked Dr. Wendell if it would affect her intelligence and mental state. Qin Sighting was a leader in the field of internal medicine and had a deep understanding of the neurological field, so what he said must have some basis. Are you sure she doesn't have any other problems? Doesn't she need to go to the hospital for a specific examination? You can go to the hospital for examination, but given her current condition, she will be stimulated and frightened by any unfamiliar people or strangers. In my opinion, her IQ is only about 7 or 10 years old, and her thinking and memory are in a mess. Sometimes she remembers something, and sometimes she doesn't. Now the most important thing is to guide her correctly. Don't let her go with malicious people and don't let her leave your sight easily. I'll contact the scientific research institute I'm familiar with and ask them to develop more effective drugs to treat her as soon as possible. With that, Qin Sighting took a look at the mess on the ground and the open cabinet door. He didn't need to ask to know what was going on. Also, she occasionally has uncontrollable irritability because of headaches. You must not stimulate her. You'd better keep her in an environment that she feels safe and comfortable. Don't come into contact with people she used to hate, and don't meet people who will make her feel extreme, because she will recall memories of the past from time to time, but she doesn't understand the source of those memories and will collapse. Why don't you answer me? What's your name? Jean Wan rested her head in Mo Jingshan's arms. It seemed that after being held by him like this for a while, the familiar feeling made her no longer have any resistance to him, but she was looking at him with a pair of red eyes, a little curious and a little cautious. Her hand was still clutching the buttons on the front of his shirt, unconsciously fiddling back and forth. Mo Jingshan raised his hand and held her hand very gently and carefully. He held her hand firmly in his palm and looked down at her. Seeing the confusion in her eyes and the pure and childlike eyes in her eyes, his heart skipped a beat. He bent down and whispered hoarsely in her ear, "I'm your husband. Don't be afraid, N. Husband." Jean Wan thought carefully about the words she knew for a long time before she blurted out, "Is it the person who will sleep with me?" Mo Jingshan, Auntie Chin, Qin Sighting. After leaving the bedroom, Qin Sighting continued to tell Auntie Chin about Jean Wan's current situation and then drove back to the hospital to get the medicine. In the bedroom, Jean Wan had been leaning in Mo Jingshan's arms. Her hand was no longer playing with his buttons, but she pinched his face as if to make sure whether he was a man in her dream or a real man. She stared at his face and said in a low voice, "I seem to have seen you before." Mo Jingshan took her hand, held her like this, opened her palm, and patiently wrote his name in her palm. "Can you read?" Jean Wan stared blankly at the slender fingers that were writing in her palm and read, Mo. Jingshan. After reading it, she was stunned for a long time before she murmured, "This name is a little familiar." Hearing this, Mo Jingshan didn't know whether to rejoice or feel heartache. He felt heartache because she had woken up but still had this sequela because of her injury. In the end, she still had to continue receiving treatment. Fortunately, although her memory was chaotic and her mind was unclear, she had some impression of everyone related to him. She hadn't forgotten him, but her memory was chaotic and she couldn't tell the situation clearly. Just as Mo Jingshan held her hand in his again and didn't speak, Jin Wan suddenly raised her head in his arms and gave him the first smile since she woke up. Although she still smiled cautiously, as if she only felt safe by his side and didn't want to leave him, fearing that he wouldn't want her anymore, she grinned and said, "Then can I call you Shinshin?" Mo Jingshan raised his eyebrows. "Call me what?" "Shinshin." Jin Wan's hand tugged at his shirt again as if afraid he would refuse. Looking at her nervous and cautious eyes, Mo Jingshan's heart ached, but at the same time, it seemed to melt. He said patiently and warmly, "Well, as long as you're happy." Sure enough, Jin Wan was happy at once, and then all kinds of questions came out of her mouth, such as why he was her husband, why she couldn't remember clearly, why so many people surrounded her and called her madam when she woke up, why these people asked her to take medicine. Mo Jingshan answered her patiently until Jin Wan fell asleep in his arms. He looked at the little woman in his arms, who was still pale when she slept, and put her on the bed. He put his hand on the back of her head, stroked her soft hair, and finally withdrew his hand, lowering his eyes to look at the little woman who was sleeping quietly. When Mo Jingshan walked out of the master bedroom, Auntie Chin was carrying the food that she had just served. After all, Jin Wan had knocked over a lot of things as soon as she woke up, but she still had to eat something. However, when she saw Mr. Mo's expression when he came out, Auntie Chin couldn't help shivering when she saw him. It was almost winter outside of High City, but the floor heating in the room was very warm. Chapter 700. At night, Jin Wan fell asleep and suddenly woke up. Mo Jingshan, who was sitting by the bed flipping through the company documents, immediately noticed her strange behavior. He tossed the documents in his hands onto the bedside table and casually hugged the little woman who had just woken up and suddenly sat up. "What's wrong?" The man's low, soothing voice was close to her ear. Jin Wan's fingers slowly trembled uncontrollably, and her shoulders also trembled. Her mind went blank for a moment. Blood. Jin Wan's eyes were a little blank, and she kept staring at a certain point in the room as if she hadn't seen anything. However, when Mo Jingshan looked at her carefully, he found that her eyes were unfocused as if she hadn't completely woken up from a dream, but she was in a state of shock. "I saw a lot of blood, someone pointed a gun at me, no matter what." Jin Wan was a little woman living in a peaceful world. Although she subconsciously did this kind of behavior to block the bullet, it didn't guarantee that she didn't feel fear in her heart. Even people who had been trained in a base like 11 all year round would feel fear in the face of such a life-or-death situation. That was the fear of human nature. "It's all right. It's all over. Now it's just a dream. It's just a dream. Good girl, don't be afraid." Mo Jingshan comforted her and patted her on the back. He knew that she was just in a dream and not awake, so he kept his voice very low, lest she would be more afraid if she suddenly woke up. Jin Wan leaned her head on his shoulder, almost holding her breath, and said hoarsely, "A lot of blood." It was more than a lot of blood. It was all her blood. Mo Jingshan held her, his thin lips pressed against her ear, and kept comforting her until the little woman closed her eyes again and her breathing gradually became even. This kind of night lasted for 3 days before Jin Wan gradually got rid of those nightmares. When she slept, she would no longer be woken up by those nightmares. On the contrary, probably every time she dreamed of something terrible, she would always hear Mo Jingshan's comforting voice in her ear, and she habitually became more and more dependent on him. During the day, when Mo Jingshan went to the company for 2 or 3 hours because of a company meeting, during the 2 or 3 hours when he was not in the Yew Garden, Jin Wan either sat alone on the bed, curled up in the quilt and did not allow anyone to touch her, or stood in a daze by the window, stubbornly and foolishly waiting for him to come back. Only when Mo Jingshan returned would Jin Wan reveal a smile and throw herself into his arms, unwilling to let go. Every time Auntie Chin saw Jin Wan throw herself into Mr. Mo's arms, she would cover her eyes and walk away. Well, anyway, Dr. Chin said that it wouldn't take long for Madame's illness to be cured. Her current state was simply a sweet burden to Mr. Mo. It seemed that ever since the divorce, Mrs. Mo had never been so close to Mr. Mo. But who said that Mrs. Mo's feelings for Mr. Mo had long been exhausted? She wanted to get close to him when she was unconscious, and she only trusted and relied on him. Obviously, in Mrs. Mo's mind, she couldn't leave him at all. Mr. Mo, when you went to the company for a meeting, Madame refused to eat lunch. We just went to reheat the lunch. Auntie Chen went downstairs to bring up lunch. These days, most of the time, it was Mo Jingshan who fed Jin Wan or accompanied her to watch her eat. But as long as Mo Jingshan was not around, Jin Wan didn't even drink water, let alone eat. At first, Auntie Chen thought she was just throwing a tantrum, but then she gradually found that Jin Wan was just afraid and guarded against all the people she didn't know, as if she were afraid of eating something dangerous and refused to open her mouth to accept a mouthful of food. This subconscious guard left Auntie Chen helpless and could only turn to Mo Jingshan for help. Put it on the table. I'll feed her, Mo Jingshan said and patted Jin Wan's shoulder. Sit down and eat first. Take me with you wherever you go in the future. I don't want to stay here alone. Jin Wan's voice was muffled. Before coming back from the company, Mo Jingshan had carefully considered this problem. Okay. He whispered softly, I won't go to the company these days. I'll stay at home with you. I won't leave, okay? Really? Jin Wan raised her head. Obviously, it was difficult for her to understand the words, company, and home. In her chaotic memory, she didn't remember that she was still the head of MN Group. She just instinctively wanted to find a little sense of security in the U Garden. She had been wandering alone for 3 years, struggling hard for 3 years, and now one day, she could finally put down her sense of responsibility. It was a good thing to let her rest like this. Really? Mo Jingshan patted her head. Can we eat now? Jin Wan nodded hesitantly. These days, Jin Wan liked to eat by herself, but she liked to be rewarded by him every time she ate, such as a look of appreciation or encouragement from Mo Jingshan, or the smile in his eyes when she ate an extra dish or a small bowl of rice, which made her so proud that she kept stuffing food into her mouth. Mo Jingshan sat by and watched her eat. From time to time, he picked up a tissue to wipe the soup from the corner of her mouth or the rice grains from the corner of her mouth. All the positions in Shine Group were always in an orderly manner. Because he traveled between High City and Los Angeles all year round, whether it was the headquarters in Los Angeles or the branch in China, there were specialized personnel to fill in the gaps when he was not around. Therefore, at the executive meeting today, he specifically said that he would not personally come to the company in the near future. If there were any documents or matters that needed him to deal with, he could have a video conference or ask Shenmue to send the documents to the U Garden for him to handle. He would not appear in the company in the short term. Right now, he had to accompany Jin Wan and couldn't let her unstable emotions be affected. He had to see her with his own eyes to rest assured. As for MN Group, when Jin Wan went to Los Angeles on a business trip a few months ago, she had asked Xia Tian to return to the company. Xia Tian's children were now taken care of by the auntie at home, and the company's affairs were still temporarily managed by Xia Tian. The executives of MN Group were also very stable under Jin Wan's management. Although there were some doubts about Jin Wan's absence in recent months, Xia Tian was a well-behaved and experienced person in management, so it didn't take long for everything to settle down. Chapter 701. Mr. Mo, This is the express delivery from the housekeeper in Yuehu Bay. Auntie Chen signed for a parcel outside the door, took it into the Yu garden, and handed it to Mo Jingshan. What express delivery? Mo Jingshan glanced at the box in Auntie Chen's hand. I don't know. The housekeeper you arranged to live there just said on the phone that it was ordered by Mrs. Mo before she went on a business trip to Los Angeles. It was mailed back to Yuehu Bay last month, but Mrs. Mo was not there, so it was kept in the security room. Later, the security guard knocked on Mrs. Mo's door and was seen by the housekeeper you arranged to receive it. Knowing that you and Mrs. Mo had returned, she asked someone to send it to the Yu garden. Auntie Chen said and put the small box on the coffee table. Do you want me to open it first? Mo Jingshan looked at the express delivery box and thought for a moment. Give it to me. Auntie Chen hurriedly picked it up and handed it to him. The box was not heavy, so the thing inside was not big. Mo Jingshan weighed it in his hand and turned into the bedroom. Jean Wan was resting at the moment. The medicine Qin sighting gave her could help her sleep. Every day after taking the medicine at noon, she had to sleep for 2 hours, which would help the medicine take effect and help her absorb the remaining blood in the blood vessels in her head. Seeing that Jean Wan was still sleeping, Mo Jingshan put the express delivery on the table, and after a while, he opened it. Inside was a light blue velvet box. As soon as he saw this velvet box, Mo Jingshan's eyes almost knew the answer. She opened it and saw that it was indeed the 10-carat blue diamond. However, the blue diamond that she had always kept at home and refused to wear was now carefully inlaid on a very exquisite white gold necklace. It looked very simple, but the workmanship of the diamond holder was very exquisite. It could be seen that the designer had put a lot of effort into it. The simple necklace paired with the gorgeous 10-carat blue diamond formed a different style. It was very suitable for her temperament and also completely set off the beauty of the blue diamond. Jean Wan had already inlaid the blue diamond he gave her before she went to Los Angeles, which showed that she was trying to take another step in his direction. Looking at the necklace in his hand, Mo Jingshan got up and gently put the necklace on her neck. Jean Wan turned her head slightly in her sleep, just enough for him to fasten the back of the necklace without waking her up. Looking at the blue diamond quietly pressed against her collarbone, it made her already fair skin look even whiter. Because Jean Wan had not fully recovered from her illness, the depression in her heart was finally dispelled. Thinking of the day when this little woman first arrived in Los Angeles, she kept saying that she didn't go to Los Angeles to find him. That kind of tone was really lovable and hateful. The Ji family and the Shao family had been waiting for Jean Wan's news, but there had been no news of her since she was brought back to High City by Mo Jingshan. Mo Jingshan's explanation was that Jean Wan had been ill recently and was not fit to go out to meet people. No matter how serious his illness was, he could refuse to see outsiders, but he could not refuse to see his own family. Ji Hongwen rushed out of the company in the afternoon on the weekend and directly asked the driver to drive to the hospital. He didn't expect that at almost the same time, the Shao family's car also stopped outside the Yu garden. Mr. Mo Jingshan was having a video conference with the people in Los Angeles in the study. At this time, Auntie Chen didn't dare to disturb him, but now she had to disturb him. Hearing the knock on the door and then hearing Auntie Chen's movement, Mo Jingshan made a pause gesture to the person on the other side of the video conference and looked back at Auntie Chen who was at the door. Knowing that she wouldn't come in easily under normal circumstances, he asked indifferently, "What happened?" "The Ji family and the Shao family have come. I can't stop them too much. I stopped them last time, but this time I really don't have any reason to stop them. Chairman Ji is Mrs. Mo's father, and he insisted on coming to see how Mrs. Mo was. I couldn't refuse him, but Mr. Shao also said that he was Mrs. Mo's father. I don't understand what's going on, but they have come in now." Auntie Chen was a little confused. I'm afraid that Mrs. Mo will be frightened when she sees them. After all, she has only let down her guard against the servants in the Yew garden and you, Mr. Mo. As for the others, I'm really worried that she will be affected. After all, Dr. Chin said that she is prone to be irritable now. Mo Jingshan was silent for a moment. It was not difficult to imagine what kind of earth-shaking quarrel Xiao Zhenjuan and Ji Hongwen would have when they met. In front of Jin Wan, she definitely couldn't stand such a scene. He directly told the person on the other side of the video conference that the meeting would be suspended and that they would continue at another time. He got up and walked out of the study. At the same time, Xiao Zhenjuan and Ji Hongwen finally saw Jin Wan. But to their surprise, the daughter they missed so much was fiercely repulsed by their appearance and even seemed to be very afraid. A servant said that Mrs. Mo's illness was because of a brain injury, and that there was still some blood left after the surgery, and she was still unconscious. At this moment, the two people who had been quarreling from the door into the villa didn't dare to say anything to provoke her. Jin Wan saw that the two of them had not allowed either of them to approach her, regardless of whether it was Ji Hongwen or Xiao Zhenjuan. Even at this moment, when the servant came over to comfort her and offered her a cup of warm water for her to drink to stabilize her emotions, she smashed the cup. Anyone could see that right now, she really couldn't see any strangers because anyone who suddenly appeared would cause her chaotic memories to become even more chaotic. She wanted to remember something but couldn't, so she became even more irritable. At this moment, there was a slight sound of movement, and a man walked in from the door. Ever since Mo Jingshan took a vacation to accompany Jin Wan, he usually wore a gray t-shirt or soft and comfortable home clothes at home. Today, he was wearing a dark t-shirt and long pants, but he did not lose his usual stern and upright appearance. His handsome and cold face revealed a hint of coldness, and his entire person was filled with an intimidating coldness. He looked at the woman who was curled up under the bed like a frightened cat, and his eyes darkened. His long legs opened, and he directly walked over. When he walked over, his eyes did not look at Ji Hongwen and Xiao Jun. They were too clear that although Mo Jingshan appeared to be humble in front of them, when it came to Jin Wan's safety, he never really cared about anyone. Just when they thought that Jin Wan would lose control of her emotions and cry out because of Mo Jingshan's touch, in the next second, the author's words, 1. The female lead did not lose her memory. There are indeed clinical cases of this illness. As long as she is treated with medicine, she will recover quickly. The cycle is very short, and the recovery is very fast. 2. For the past 3 years, Jin Wan had been supporting herself and growing stronger on her own. I had been trying to find a suitable opportunity for her to rely on Mo Tiantan, to make up for all the grievances she had suffered. To let the male lead truly feel the adorable female lead who is especially dependent on him for a period of time. Guaranteed sweet. If it's not sweet, it's free. 3. From here until the end of the main text, there will be no more torture. The wife-doting maniac has begun to protect his wife. Chapter 702. Nuan Nuan. Mo Jingshan put his hand on her shoulder and pushed aside the messy hair around her neck. The moment Jin Wan saw him, when he bent down to pick her up, she instinctively threw herself at him, her hands clutching his sleeves tightly. Mo Jingshan's movements were meticulous and focused. He picked her up from the ground. Even though Jin Wan was trembling all over as if she would break in his arms in the next second, he put her on the bed as if he didn't see the people in front of the door. Jin Wan was frightened and repulsed by everyone, but she didn't reject Mo Jingshan's approach. Instead, she seemed to rely on him. To be precise, she didn't take the initiative to respond. When Mo Jingshan picked her up, she didn't make any aggressive movements. She just let the man tidy up her hair and clothes and put her on the bed. The maid who was familiar with Jin Wan came to hand her water, which almost made her lose control on the spot. But Imo Jingshin was different. The cold, tall man sat down by the bed and put his hand on Jinwan's hand, which was clutching the quilt nervously. His voice was low and quiet. "I'll let them leave. You stay in the bedroom and rest. Don't be nervous, okay?" He asked her, but his tone was very light. Jinwan didn't speak, but her body trembled a lot under his gaze. He looked at her pale little face and continued to ask in a low voice, "Did you not recognize them, or did you have a headache when you saw them?" She still didn't want to speak but raised her hand and knocked her head. Obviously, she had a headache. Seeing her like this, Imo Jingshin didn't ask more. He tucked her in, got up, and looked at the two people in front of the door who were stunned by this scene. Seeing Imo Jingshin come over, Ji Hongwen frowned. "Jingshin, why is Nuan like this? Didn't you say she was just sick? Is she seriously injured? Even her head is injured." Xiao Zhenjuan also frowned and looked at Jinwan, who didn't recognize him at all. Usually, no matter how much Jinwan rejected the Xiao family, at least she could talk calmly and rationally. Even if she didn't want to listen, she would listen to him quietly. But now Jinwan, it was hard to imagine what she had been through with her blurred five senses. As a result, Xiao Zhenjuan's gaze on Imo Jingshin became much colder. What exactly is going on with her? The tall, cold man looked at them coldly, and his low voice was even colder. "The security facilities of the Yu Garden have always been perfect. If you hadn't been Jinwan's elders, I'm afraid you would have been driven out. Chairman Ji, Chairman Xiao, please give her enough quiet space after seeing her current situation and don't come to irritate her easily." Imo Jingshin put Jinwan behind him and glanced at Xiao Zhenjuan, who was frowning. "I know President Xiao wants to take her back. After all, the Xiao family has its own medical team. You want to treat her in person, but as you can see, she is very irritable now. If you take her to another place, I don't know what will happen to her. I hope President Xiao can understand her physical condition and don't make things difficult for her. Don't force her." Xiao Zhenjuan's face changed slightly. It wasn't hard to tell that Imo Jingshin was warning him. He looked at Jinwan, who was protected by Imo Jingshin on the bed, and said coldly, "CEO Mo, my daughter was fine a few months ago, and I just learned about her birth. I tried my best to get closer to her, but now she has become like this. Aren't you responsible for this?" Ji Hongwen frowned and said, "Jingshin has always been affectionate to Nuan. He would rather bear the pain himself than let her get hurt easily. I've seen how he treats Jinwan. There's no need to blame him. Isn't it obvious that Nuan is still so dependent on him? Regardless of whether it's me, the father who watched her grow up, or you, the biological father whom she hasn't seen for more than 20 years, to her, we're both very unfamiliar. Only toward Jingshin, she trusts him completely. What else is there to pursue?" Xiao Zhenjuan's face darkened, and his tone was very bad. The Xiao family's medical team is very professional. If Nuan can't go to the Xiao family to recuperate, send a medical team here to treat her 24 hours a day. Imo Jingshin's lips curved in a cold smile. "She was already so frightened after seeing you. You sent a few unfamiliar doctors over. Are you trying to make her break down?" Imo Jingshin's lips curved up coldly, and he seemed to be smiling. "So, how did she suddenly become like this? What the hell is going on?" Xiao Zhenjuan's face darkened. Even though Xiao Zhenjuan only wanted to bring his daughter home and did not have any intention of starting a war, and he was calm enough, when he met Imo Jingshin's cold and indifferent gaze, his heart was still ignited. His daughter was unwilling to return to the Xiao family when she was healthy. Now that she was in such a state, it wasn't easy for the Xiao family to step forward to treat her and reconcile the relationship between father and daughter. However, it was fine that Ji Hongwen was standing in the middle, but Mo Jingshan was also standing in the way. There was no room for negotiation. Mo Jingshan smiled coldly and said indifferently, "Don't worry, President Xiao. I also have the most professional and authoritative doctors here." After these days of treatment, Jean Wan's headache has been greatly alleviated, and there are new drugs developed by the Research Institute to control her condition. It won't take long for her to recover. As for President Xiao, if you want to save your daughter, you'd better wait until she wakes up. Otherwise, if I hand her over to you now, I'm afraid I can't give her a reasonable explanation when she wakes up. Ji Hongwen took a step forward and said anxiously, "How long will it take?" "Don't let Nguyen run around like this. Jingshan, you must keep an eye on her." Mo Jingshan took a look at Ji Hongwen. "Don't worry. I'm on vacation now. I'll stay by her side every day." Ji Hongwen sighed and looked at Jean Wan, who was hiding under the quilt and looking at the door. His heart ached for her, but there was nothing he could do. At this time, he could only wait for her to recover. And since Mo Jingshan had said that he had specially developed drugs for her, which would shorten the course of the disease and make her better as soon as possible, there was nothing he could do. As her father, he couldn't help her at this time. But the only thing he could be thankful for was that the person Jean Wan relied on was Mo Jingshan, not someone else with ulterior motives. Chapter 703. Xiao Zhenjuan also looked at him coldly. When the two of them were about to argue about Jean Wan again, Mo Jingshan gave Auntie Chen a look, and Auntie Chen hurriedly said, "Chairman Ji, Chairman Xiao, Mrs. Mo needs to rest now. Please leave the master bedroom and go to the living room on the first floor to have some tea." Xiao Zhenjuan's face was cold. "There's no need for tea, but I'm worried about her now. Next time I come to visit her, don't stop me. I promise I'll just look at her from a distance and won't scare her again." Hearing Xiao Zhenjuan, who had always been superior, making such a compromise, Ji Hongwen looked calm and didn't speak, and Auntie Chen still asked them to leave with a smile. As for Mo Jingshan, he just looked at them indifferently. When they both turned to go out in consideration of Jean Wan's condition, Mo Jingshan glanced at their backs and said lightly to the servant outside the door, "Next time the Xiao and Ji families come to the Yu Garden, don't stop them. It's necessary to tell me before they come in." "All right, Mr. Mo." Mo Jingshan turned and walked back to the bed. Looking at the little woman who was still hiding in the quilt, he sat on the bed and patted her on the head reassuringly. "All right, they're all gone." With that, he helped Jean Wan tuck in the quilt and didn't look at anyone outside the door. Ji Hongwen and Xiao Zhenjuan, who had gone downstairs, didn't get along well with each other. The old and new hatred of more than 20 years was still a knot that couldn't be solved. But at this time, the two of them had the same thought in their hearts. They had seen the most arrogant rich people. But their son-in-law, who was so cold and indifferent, could only swallow his anger and couldn't say a word. So who was the closest person to Jean Wan? Her adoptive father and biological father were no match for Mo Jingshan. In the master bedroom, Jean Wan sat up from the bed, looked out, and then boldly asked, "Just now those two people said they were my fathers. Why do I have two fathers?" Without saying a word, Mo Jingshan put the woman on his lap and chuckled. "Which one of them do you like best?" "Neither of them." "But why do I have two fathers?" "None of them were pleasing to the eye." Mo Jingshan did not seem to mind as he calmly said, "It's fine if you don't like it. It's fine as long as you find me pleasing to the eye. Should I know them?" He pursed his lips and said, "You'll understand after you recover. Anything I say now will be memories that you can't digest." "Oh." Jean Wan sat in his arms with a confused expression. "But you all said I was injured. Last night, when I showered, I didn't see any wounds on my body. I touched everywhere, and I didn't bleed. Why did you all say I was injured?" The man's fingers carelessly brushed the soft fur on her sleeves. The wound has already healed. Of course, it won't bleed anymore. Is my injury very serious? It's very serious. How did I get hurt? Why are you injured? For me. Hearing his answer, Jinwon stared at him for a long time, but it seemed that she still couldn't understand the meaning of his words. However, just as she was thinking hard, the man put his hand on the back of her head and gently pressed her closer to his arms. Then she felt warmth on her forehead. The man's kiss fell on her forehead and then gradually moved down to her eyebrows, nose, and finally, when it was about to fall on her lips, he saw that her eyes were confused. She didn't seem to be afraid or aroused. She just didn't seem to understand what he was doing. He paused. Not wanting to scare her, he just kissed her lightly on the lips and let her go under her stunned eyes. Why are you looking at me in a daze? Jinwon was confused just now, but now she said with a red face, "You were kissing me just now." The man chuckled. Do you know what kissing means? Jinwon nodded, then shook her head, and then nodded again. I know. You're my husband, so you can kiss me. No one else can kiss me. Mo Jingshin smiled at her, pretending to understand. He raised his hand and gently pressed her head. Does your head still hurt? If you don't want the nurse sent by Dr. Chin to massage you, I'll do it for you. Jinwon raised her hand to pull his hand down and shook her head. It doesn't hurt as much as it did a few days ago, but I'm so bored sitting here in a daze every day. The computer, phone, and iPad that Auntie Chin brought me are not good. Rest for a few more days. When the doctor says your condition is stable, I'll take you out to relax, but you must control yourself. Don't be afraid of strangers. As long as you're by my side, trust me. I'll protect you. You don't need to be afraid of anyone, okay? Jinwon hesitated and nodded with some anxiety and yearning. Okay. Mo Jingshin smiled and rubbed her hair. When Mo Jingshin left Jinwon's bedroom, Jinwon picked up the iPad that Auntie Chin brought her and watched all kinds of videos and movies. She flipped through them and was curious about everything. The man stayed at home to accompany Jinwon. Dressed in soft gray home clothes, he still looked handsome and cold. Jinwon clicked into a place on the iPad, which was the operation bar of a video history. After opening it, she found that there were a lot of things she had seen before. She didn't have a deep impression of them, so she casually scrolled down until she found a video from a long time ago. Seeing Jinwon's name on the video, she clicked in curiously. It turned out that what she saw was the interview she had done in England after she was recognized as a Forbes Chinese female entrepreneur. The woman in the video was herself, dressed in a beautiful, professional suit, sitting in the interview hall and talking calmly with the host who spoke English. Jinwon found that she could understand English and could even understand all the content of the interview. For example, the Forbes Chinese female entrepreneur Jinwon, the history of the MN Group's rise, and the Jinwon in the video. Every frown and smile of the Jinwon was charming yet unapproachable, like the self-confidence of a leader of a large company. The Jinwon in the video felt both familiar and strange to her. The female CEO of MN Group. Was this herself? Jinwon put down the iPad after watching the video for more than 40 minutes. She raised her hand and knocked her aching head, but this time, she found that her head seemed to be splitting. She immediately raised both hands to cover her head and pressed hard. Chapter 704. Mo Jingshin walked down the stairs. Ji Hongwen and Xiao Xinjuan hadn't left yet. When they looked back, they saw him coming down. The man's aura at home was clean and cold, and his steady footsteps made the silence in the hall on the first floor even more obvious. Mo Jingshin looked at the two silent people. Haven't you left yet? Is there anything you haven't told us? Ji Hongwen sighed. I'm just thinking, after Nuan became so sick, she only recognizes you as her daughter. As a father, I'm still a failure after all these years. After a moment of silence, Ji Hongwen asked, in the 2 days after she woke up, you must have spent a lot of effort to comfort her, right? Looking at her just now, it's hard to imagine what she's like when her emotions aren't stabilized. Auntie Chen whispered, when Mrs. Mo woke up that day, she smashed almost everything that could be smashed. Then she hid in the cupboard and refused to let us touch her. Fortunately, Mr. Mo came back in time. Otherwise, we didn't know what to do. Hearing this, Ji Hongwen felt even more sorry and blamed himself. He felt sorry for Ji Wan, who was so seriously injured, and blamed himself for not being able to help her. Xiao Zhenjuan closed his eyes and said, back then, when Qing Lin was in a bad state, you were the only one by her side who could accompany her and take care of her. Although you hid my daughter by your side for more than 20 years, I can't deny that you did indeed take good care of her and her mother. Now that Nuanyuan is in such a state, we can't do anything about it. Just like back then, even if I went to pick up Qing Lin, I'm afraid she wouldn't be willing to leave with me. Ji Hongwen didn't expect that Xiao Zhenjuan, who had been stubborn for so many years and was used to calling the shots in Ling Xiao Group, would say such a thing. Mo Jingshan didn't interrupt but said, Auntie Chen, ask someone to prepare dinner. I think Chairman Ji and Chairman Xiao finally want to have a chat after more than 20 years. Let them sit down and have a good chat. No, take good care of Nuan. If you need any help, come to me at any time. The Xiao family will do our best to help. Xiao Zhenjuan looked a little gloomy, probably because of Ji Wan's rejection and fear, and because he saw Ji Wan like this, he thought of what her mother looked like in the Ji family. It was useless to say anything now, but he didn't mean to make up with the Ji family. After saying this, he turned and walked away with a dark face. Mo Jingshan narrowed his eyes and did not speak. Ji Hongwen didn't stay long. After all, everyone in the Yu Garden was surrounding Ji Wan. He didn't want to cause any trouble, so he said a few words and left with Xiao Zhenjuan. Mo Jingshan indifferently watched as the people left the Yu Garden and turned to head upstairs. In the bedroom, Ji Wan was lying on the bed. Her headache had passed, but she was still looking at the Ji Wan who was being interviewed in the video with a puzzled look. She observed her tone and expression, and from time to time, she smiled and mimicked her facial expressions. Mo Jingshan heard the sound on her iPad outside the door and guessed what she was looking at. He stared at her for a moment to make sure she was looking at her old self and that she was fine, then he went back to the study, but before returning to the study, he told the servant to keep an eye on her outside the bedroom at all times. In the study, the video conference that had ended not long ago had been interrupted. Mo Jingshan closed the computer and picked up his cell phone to make a phone call. His voice was clear and cold. Close the trading channel of those underground arms dealers. No one related to us can use this channel in the future. Just cut it off and give the important part to Nanheng. The person on the other side of the phone recognized his voice and was very respectful and polite. Mr. Control, are you going to have nothing to do with those underground arms dealers in the future? I haven't been involved in them for so many years. I just know all the channels. Do I look like I'm going to keep them? Ah. The person on the other side of the phone was a little surprised. Are you really going to give up the power? Mo Jingshan said indifferently, do as I say, and you won't suffer any loss. Don't delay. Contact Nanheng directly. He will send someone over. The people of 11 Base know what to do. But we have always trusted you for so many years, and you will never betray us no matter what. Now if these channels are given back to us, it's hard to say whether we won't. Mo Jingshan smiled mildly. I'm sure you don't wish for me to sell you out of impatience one day. Okay, I see. I'll do it right away. After hanging up the phone, Mo Jingshan dialed another number with his long fingers. He put his hand on the computer and looked straight at the bookshelf not far away with his deep and calm eyes. I'll return the management of 11 base to you. I don't want it, and you don't have to force me. Just clean up the remnants of the Cambodian gang one by one for me. Otherwise, sooner or later, they will find you, and then I won't be able to go through thick and thin with you. On the other end of the phone was Nan Heng's still lazy and sexy voice. Are you going to concentrate on being the president of Shine Group and stay at home with your wife? Mo Jingshan said indifferently, she is different from Feng Ling. She belongs to your world, but she was forcibly pulled out, while Jin Wan doesn't belong to that world, but she was forcibly pulled in. It's time to call it a day. After a moment of silence, the person on the other side of the phone chuckled. All right, I see. Grandfather Mo's concerns were right. I also know that sooner or later you will return to your nature. The voice on the other side of the phone paused. How is Jin Wan now? She hasn't woken up yet. After all, old Chin is still in High City. He said it won't take long to cure her, so let's leave it to time. Anyway, you're going to focus on accompanying your wife now. She stays by your side obediently and doesn't run around, unlike me, who can't even be caught. Now she's using all the skills I taught her to take revenge on me. She's becoming more and more cunning. She's like a loach that I can't catch, but she can still bite me. Hearing the voice on the other side of the phone, Nan Heng paused and said indifferently, leave it to me. Just stay with Jin Wan in High City. Bye. Mo Jingshan grunted in response, hung up the phone, and casually put the phone on the table. At this time, Jin Wan was quietly standing at the door of his study. Seeing that he had finished the phone call, she quietly pushed the door open and looked in carefully. When Mo Jingshan noticed her movement and turned to look at her, their eyes met, and Jin Wan immediately blushed in embarrassment. She didn't expect to be discovered so quickly. She pointed to the iPad in her hand, pointed inside, and asked in a low voice, Shinshin, can I go in and ask you a question? Chapter 705. Seeing Jin Wan's sneaky and childish look, Mo Jingshan smiled. What do you want to know? Jin Wan then quietly looked back at the servant who had been following her. Just now, when she came out of the bedroom, the servant had been following her. Because Mo Jingshan had responded inside, after receiving the servant's permission, Jin Wan squeezed in through the crack of the door. Now she had lost a lot of weight, so she squeezed in without opening the door too much. This is the person. Jin Wan walked over, raised the iPad to him, and tried to show him. This woman is also called Jin Wan. I think she looks exactly like me, so is this the person I used to be? Mo Jingshan took the iPad and casually flipped through it. He saw that she had found all the interview videos she had participated in, as well as some of the scenes of her being surrounded by the media in High City, including the time when he had said in front of the media that they had never divorced because of Ji Mingran's trick. She had also dug out the video. She even knew to search for her own name on it. It's you. The man looked at Jin Wan in the iPad for a while, and a warm smile suddenly flashed across his eyes. Then he looked at Jin Wan, who was looking at him curiously. This is you before you got sick. Jin Wan nodded repeatedly. I used to be so beautiful. The man immediately smiled, raised his hand, and gently stroked her hair as if coaxing a child. You are also very beautiful now. No, I haven't seen those beautiful clothes. Even the clothes Auntie Chin bought for me are not as beautiful as these. Jin Wan pointed to herself on the screen and saw all kinds of beautiful clothes. Mo Jingshan paused. Her own clothes should be in Yuehu Bay, and most of the clothes in the Yu Garden were bought by Auntie Chin. Many of the clothes were what Jean Wan liked 3 years ago. Auntie Chin didn't know that Jean Wan had changed a lot in the past 3 years in London, and people at Auntie Chin's age thought that Jean Wan should be comfortable at home, so most of the clothes in the wardrobe were in line with Auntie Chin's taste, and many of them were home clothes. "You like these clothes? Shall I take you to buy them tomorrow?" Hearing that she was going out, Jean Wan's eyes lit up again, and then she asked, "Are there many people in the clothes shop?" "A lot." Mo Jingshan watched her patiently and gently. "You do need to train in a crowd. If you're always afraid of strangers, I'm afraid you can only stay at home while you recuperate. You can make your own choice, and..." Jean Wan hesitated for a long time before timidly whispering, "Will you always accompany me?" "Yes." "Then let's go buy it." Jean Wan's eyes were full of expectation, but she was also a little nervous. Her desire to go out and buy beautiful clothes inspired her courage. Besides, Mo Jingshan promised that he would always be with her. She believed him. That night, after Jean Wan returned to the bedroom and fell asleep, Mo Jingshan asked the servant to go to Jean Wan's home in Yuehu Bay to fetch the clothes she liked. Jean Wan was still holding the iPad in her sleep. It seemed that since she found herself in it, she had been reluctant to put the iPad down. She even held it in her sleep. Even when the screen was dark, she still wouldn't let it go. She didn't like the feeling of headaches, confusion, and even confusion of memory every day. When she was not grumpy and calm, she longed for memories and a sober and rational self. Qin Siding said that when she had this kind of feeling, it meant that everything was going in a good direction. It would be of great help to her recovery if she could always keep a clear head, not be stimulated, and gradually adapt to the current life. Mo Jingshan didn't continue the meeting yesterday. This morning, he would meet with the United States. After all, the time difference between China and the United States was different. He had to get up at 6:00 in the morning for a meeting, so he woke up early. When he opened his eyes, he saw a fair and delicate face leaning against his chest. Her eyelashes were slender and dense, like a row of small fans. Her long dark hair was spread on the pillow, lazy and beautiful. She was sleeping deeply, defenseless in his arms. The man propped up his elbow and looked at her for a while. Suddenly, a bad impulse flashed across his eyes. He reached out to pinch her nose, leaned over, and kissed her, taking away her breath. Jean Wan was naturally woken up by the feeling of suffocation. She had been sleeping in his arms last night, and in the morning, she was still in a deep sleep, so when she opened her eyes, she was a little dazed and didn't know what had happened. When the dazed haze in her eyes faded and she saw the man's smiling black eyes, she realized that he was kissing her again. However, since she woke up, most of the time he kissed her pitifully. At this moment, he kissed her deeply, and she almost couldn't resist. Seeing that Jean Wan was innocent and ignorant but didn't resist because she knew he was his wife, Mo Jingshan admitted that he was impulsive for a moment and his lower body showed his desire for her. But seeing this little woman's innocent look, even if she probably wouldn't resist no matter what he did, he still couldn't bear to do it. After all, her mind was still at the stage of a child. Holding back his desires, Mo Jingshan gradually softened his kiss and kissed her gently on the corner of her lips. Jean Wan met the man's deep, dark eyes with a smile and heard his low, unhurried voice, "I'm going to the study. You're not allowed to sleep in today. Sleep for at most 2 hours before you get up to clean up. I'll accompany you to buy clothes early. There are fewer people in the morning, so you won't be afraid when there are too many people." Jean Wan nodded blankly. When she saw him sit up, she suddenly subconsciously raised her hand to grab his clothes. When he turned his head to look at her, she asked with wide eyes, "Shinshin, did you put something in your pants when you slept? It's so hard. It was especially uncomfortable earlier. The moment Mo Jingshan's expression faltered, Jin Wan curiously reached out to touch it. What did you put in your pants? For the first time in his life, Mo Jingshan dodged back and retreated under the bed. When he saw the little woman's curious expression, he immediately rubbed his forehead, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. Nothing. I'm going to take a shower. You can continue sleeping. Oh. Jin Wan hugged the quilt and curled up on the bed. She continued to look at his pants and seemed a little unhappy. She softly muttered, You clearly put something in your pants, but you won't let me see, Mo Jingshan. Chapter 706. When Mo Jingshan entered the bathroom, he caught a glimpse of several toiletries placed in front of the bathroom mirror. Last night, he took a shower in the spare bathroom of the study and didn't come back here. He didn't enter the bedroom until Jin Wan fell asleep for a long time. He didn't notice that all the toiletries here had been replaced with couple style. Auntie Chen had asked for Jin Wan's opinion on all her daily necessities. It was probably Jin Wan's idea to replace all the toiletries with couple style. When this little woman wasn't being stubborn with him, she was very romantic in her bones. She even knew how to play around with these little things. When she was sober, she lacked this tenacity, but in the past 3 years, she had become more and more stubborn. Even when she was on the verge of death, she would give him a fatal blow and wouldn't stop until he was in pain. Mo Jingshan picked up one of the blue toothbrushes and glanced at the pink one next to it. It seemed that he hadn't taken a vacation for too long. It was a rare vacation in life, and it was rare for him to find a sense of security in this kind of ordinary warmth that he had never felt before. Mo Jingshan spent half a month building up Jin Wan's courage. He accompanied her to shopping malls, parks, and amusement parks to familiarize her with all kinds of people, and when Auntie Chen went out to buy groceries, he didn't let Auntie Chen go but took Jin Wan to the supermarket. In the past half a month, Jin Wan hid behind him in fright when she saw strangers outside, and even crouched on the ground with her head in her hands when she saw something familiar outside. She gradually adapted to strangers outside, but she was still used to holding his hand every time. Even in the supermarket, when he pushed the shopping cart with one hand and took something on the shelf with the other, she carefully tugged at his clothes or cuffs. During the weekend, Xia Tian came to the Yew Garden to see Jin Wan, but Jin Wan ignored her. Obviously, Jin Wan was not afraid of her, but she didn't recognize her. When Xia Tian asked Jin Wan if she didn't find her familiar, Jin Wan's answer was, Yes, you look very familiar. You look like a bad woman who steals other people's husbands in TV shows. Tell me the truth, are you going to steal my husband? Xia Tian was so angry that she almost exploded. Auntie Chen explained with a headache, Miss Xia, please don't mind her. Recently, the way our wife gets familiar with the outside world is to watch movies, TV shows, or some videos. You are too beautiful, so she may have misunderstood. How dare she not recognize me? Xia Tian angrily tugged at her sleeves. She didn't even plan to stay for dinner in the Yew Garden. She picked up her bag and stormed off, saying as she walked, Jin Wan, I'll give you 1 month to wake up. If you don't wake up, I'll take advantage of this time to plot a great scheme to usurp the throne. If I don't put the title of MN Group's legal representative and global regional president on my head, if I don't put your MN Group under my own name, I'll call you Grandma. Auntie Chen, the servant, Jin Wan didn't understand. She watched as the beautiful woman who didn't look very annoying stormed away. It was quite a while before she turned to ask Auntie Chen, why did she call me Grandma? Auntie Chen was speechless. It had been about a month and a half since Jin Wan woke up. Qin Siding came to examine her in person every 2 days. In the past, Every time she saw a doctor coming to examine her body, she was always afraid and wanted to hide, but since she found how good she used to be on the iPad, she especially hoped that she could recover as soon as possible and remember everything as soon as possible, so she no longer resisted and even cooperated obediently during the brain examination. She would chat with Enchanting, and the irritable mood she had at the beginning gradually disappeared. Most of the remaining blood in the brain has been absorbed. It won't be long before she recovers. After examining her, Enchanting turned to pack up the various small but very advanced medical testing equipment he brought. I think she's in good condition recently. Didn't you say you were going to take her out for a walk? Let's find a place with good air and calm air to take her for a walk. Basking in the sun is good for the blood absorption of the brain. Now it's winter in High City. It's good to take her to a warm place. Mo Jingshan looked at Jin Wan, who was sitting obediently by the bed and listening to them. She had indeed mentioned for a long time that she wanted to go to more places. It seemed that after they got married, the two of them had either been on business trips or she had gone to T-City to study. They had never gone on a simple vacation together during the vacation. 2 years ago, didn't you buy a large island near Argentina? Later, it was transformed into a tourist resort. In the past 2 years, that island seems to be quite popular. I think we should keep the goodies to ourselves. You can take her to the island to relax and go to the beach to bask in the sun. Mo Jingshan looked at Jin Wan, who was looking at them expectantly. He curled his lips, and his eyes, which were as deep as an ancient well, slowly revealed a thick smile. You really want to go? Jin Wan nodded repeatedly. Yes. The man nodded lightly. Then let's go. Hearing this, Enchanting's eyelids twitched. He turned to look at Jin Wan, who excitedly threw herself into Mo Jingshan's arms, and then at Mo Jingshan holding Jin Wan like an old father. He couldn't help laughing. It's true that you are a wife-doting maniac. Now you don't show any signs of degeneration. Instead, you spoil Jin Wan even more. I just made a suggestion, and you agreed to it in less than a minute. You've aroused her curiosity. If I don't agree, do you think she will be disappointed? Mo Jingshan held Jin Wan tightly in his arms, lest she accidentally fell in his arms, and slowly put her down on the ground, whispering, "Be careful." Okay, when do I leave? Jin Wan blinked at him. When do you want to go? Tomorrow. Jin Wan's eyes were full of desire. All right, tomorrow. Mo Jingshan looked at the excitement in her eyes and did not object. Jin Wan was so happy that she threw herself into his arms again and kissed Mo Jingshan's face. Mo Jingshan liked her recent undisguised enthusiasm and happiness. Enchanting's lips twitched harshly, and he rubbed his forehead. She could even show so much affection to a sick person. She was really a beast. But then again, Jin Wan was quite cute like this. Chapter 707. The trip to Argentina was soon settled, and the next day, Jin Wan followed Mo Jingshan on the plane. Perhaps it was because the air pressure outside the cabin was too low when they were flying over the Pacific Ocean. Jin Wan didn't feel anything on international flights, but this time, she had a terrible headache. During the flight, Jin Wan rested her head in Mo Jingshan's arms most of the time. When she had a terrible headache, she raised her hand to knock her head. Whenever she did this, Mo Jingshan would hold her hand and gently press her head. Mo Jingshan kept massaging her head until the little woman gradually fell asleep in his arms. His hands didn't stop. Jin Wan slept for more than 2 hours. When she woke up, she saw Mo Jingshan and smiled at him. I just had a dream. Mo Jingshan looked down at her. What did you dream of? I dreamed that you made a lot of cakes for me. There seemed to be 21, and the fireworks on the balcony, were very beautiful. Jean Wan found a comfortable position and continued to lean in his arms. Eating cakes is my birthday, right? When is my birthday? Mo Jingshan's hand gently stroked her cheek and then her hair. Her so-called dream was the time when he helped her celebrate her birthday in Tea City. This meant that her confused memories were recovering bit by bit. Her birthday was in winter. On the 4th day in Argentina, it was Jean Wan's 25th birthday. Do you want to eat cake? Okay. Okay. After landing in Argentina, perhaps because Mo Jingshan's obsession from when he was in Jing City failed, even though the island was the territory of Shine Group, he chose a sea view hot spring hotel closest to the seaside. During this season, there were many people on the island, especially the Chinese people who came for a vacation. The hotel that Mo Jingshan had chosen was extremely secluded on the crowded island. Furthermore, the hot spring garden that he had booked was an area that no one else could enter. On the first day in Argentina, Jean Wan was very excited about the blue sea, the boundless pool, and the outdoor hot spring under the scorching sun. She put on her swimsuit and swam around in the water. She knew how to swim, but she didn't remember it. At first, she had to use a swimming ring to swim in the water. Later, when she gradually left the swimming ring, she realized that she could actually swim, so she swam back and forth in the water like a fish. Although he had finally satisfied his desire to bring Jean Wan to the hot spring hotel, he never expected that he had chosen the wrong time. Back in Jing City, if she had dared to swim in the water in front of him dressed like this, he would not have let her off easily. But now, Jean Wan was wearing a white bikini, and her skin was so white that it was almost the color of a bikini. Her long hair swayed behind her like seaweed. Sometimes she went ashore, and sometimes she swam in the water. Mo Jingshan could only order a cup of iced coffee and sit by the side to calm himself. One cup wasn't enough. He ordered another cup with ice. But Jean Wan couldn't drink iced coffee. When she was tired from swimming, she came up to him and tried to snatch his coffee. However, Mo Jingshan didn't let her touch the iced coffee. He only called the hotel waitress over to pour her a glass of room-temperature juice. Jean Wan refused. I also want to drink iced coffee. You'll have a stomachache if you drink it. You can't drink it. Jean Wan looked disappointed. Oh. She reluctantly took the juice from the waitress and took a few sips. Jean Wan was unhappy because she didn't drink the iced coffee, and the waitress was very envious of her. At first, she was excited to know that the owner of this island, the big boss of Shine Group, had come in person, and then she was envious of CEO Mo's patience and love for his wife. Although Jean Wan looked a little like a spoiled child, she didn't show any strange behavior in front of outsiders, so everyone thought that Mrs. Mo had been spoiled by CEO Mo to be so innocent, lovely, and innocent. CEO Mo, a legendary figure in the business world, usually kept a low profile and rarely showed up. This island in Argentina was a tourism project of Shine Group in the past 2 years. Although this island was very popular recently, no one expected that CEO Mo would come in person with his wife. However, CEO Mo didn't go to various places to visit or check the conditions of the hotels and the environment. He just accompanied his wife to watch the sea view in the hotel, accompanied her to eat her favorite food, or just sat here and watched his wife swim. And it was really bad for women to drink things that were too cold. CEO Mo not only doted on Mrs. Mo but also took good care of her body and wouldn't let her touch anything cold. Such a good man was almost extinct on the earth, not to mention such a powerful and rich man. There were waiters and waitresses from various countries in this hotel. Because Jean Wan often swam, there were 3 or 4 Chinese waitresses sent here to serve them. There were no men. Those who could work here were all young and beautiful, but Mo Jingshan didn't even look at them. Obviously, he only had his wife in his eyes. Mo Jingshan envied him to death but could only watch him eat dog food. It was really torturous. CEO, there's a snack street and a handicraft street near the hotel. These are some of the characteristic streets planned by the island tourist area. It's only a dozen minutes walk from the main entrance of the hotel. Although your wife likes to swim here, I suggest you accompany her to walk on those characteristic streets. There are novelties from different countries. I think your wife will like it very much. The waitress said with a smile as she brought him a new iced coffee. Mo Jingshan's eyes were still on Jean Wan, who was sitting by the pool and splashing water with her feet in the water. He didn't move his eyes away at all and asked indifferently, "What's there?" "Everything." When Shine Group planned the scenic area here, it took into account that people from various countries would come here for vacation, so we have almost all kinds of things we can think of. You should have seen these special streets in your subordinates' reports, but you haven't experienced them in person. Why don't you take your wife to visit them this time? Women usually like that kind of place. Mo Jingshan nodded lightly and said no more. Chapter 708. Jean Wan was almost addicted to the feeling of swimming in the water. No matter how hard she struggled in the water, she didn't find it tiring. Then she suddenly found that the waitresses near the pool and the outdoor hot spring had all left. She came out of the water, raised her hand to wipe the water off her face, and looked back at the place where Mo Jingshan had been sitting, only to find that Mo Jingshan had also disappeared. She was startled for a moment and then scanned the surroundings. She did not see any trace of Mo Jingshan after looking around for a long time. Jean Wan's eyes immediately panicked. She hurriedly swam to the side and was about to go up. All of a sudden, her waist, which was submerged in the pool, tightened, and someone was pulling her down. She instinctively screamed, but before she could finish, she was dragged into the water. In less than a second, she felt suffocated underwater. She hurriedly opened her eyes, only to see that Mo Jingshan, who had been sitting above, had entered the pool at some point. At the moment she froze, he pulled her into his arms and kissed her lips underwater, as if he knew she was suffocating and gave her 2 breaths of air. Jean Wan was first startled and then stunned. When she came to herself, the man carried her out of the water because he didn't want her to be too uncomfortable underwater. The moment Jean Wan's head came out of the water, her eyes widened. You, she couldn't say a word. The man swam with her to the edge of the pool, let her lean against the edge, and deepened the kiss. Just as Jean Wan gradually relaxed in his arms and instinctively raised her hands to hold his neck and carefully responded, the man suddenly stopped. His dark eyes looked at the passion in her eyes and the innocent look of wanting to cooperate with him. He chuckled and said hoarsely, "Do you know how I feel after watching you swim in the water for a whole day?" Jean Wan hadn't extricated herself from the kiss. Because of his words, she looked at him with a blush. "How do you feel?" The man's hand was directly under the water. He took her hand and moved it toward his lower body. Jean Wan didn't understand what he was going to do, and then her eyes gradually widened. Finally, she said in surprise, "What did you put in your pants this time? You won't let me see it every time." Because her hand curiously touched around, the man, who had only wanted to tease her, instantly let out a muffled groan. He pressed her firmly against the edge of the pool and abruptly pulled her hand out of the water. Jean Wan glared at him. "Stingy. If you have something good, just hide it on you." The man sighed. "You really want to know?" Jean Wan nodded very seriously. "Yes. I'll tell you tonight, huh?" The man hugged her. After all, he had sat by the side and endured for a day. Even a few cups of iced coffee could not relieve the pain of being able to see but not eat. At this moment, he held her in his arms, and the woman's soft body obediently let him hold her, as if this could relieve a lot. After hugging her for a long time, Mo Jingshan kissed her earlobe. You've swum the whole day today. Tomorrow, I'll accompany you out of the hotel. Do you want to go? Yes, as long as you accompany me, I can go anywhere. All right, I'll accompany you. The man lovingly stroked her hair. Jin Wan stayed in his arms, raised her head, and kissed his chin. Recently, she often unconsciously liked to take the initiative to kiss him, and every time she did it, Mo Jingshan's heart was comforted. At least when she was inseparable and lacked a sense of security, he could always be by her side. He really couldn't imagine if he was not by her side at this time, but if it were someone else, would she be so dependent on that person? Mo Jingshan rubbed her wet hair again, bent down, and kissed her hairline. The next day, on a characteristic street 10 minutes away from the hotel, Jin Wan looked around as if she was curious about everything. However, she held Mo Jingshan's hand the whole time and refused to let go. In 2 days, it would be Jin Wan's birthday. Mo Jingshan deliberately looked for a suitable birthday present and had asked someone to make sufficient arrangements. The two of them walked on the street, and whenever Jin Wan saw something nice, he would take a few more glances. However, after walking for a while, he found that Jin Wan's current situation was that everything she saw was fresh and she liked it. He had planned to see what she liked most now, but the little woman was surprised all the way, as if everything could make her excited. Mo Jingshan asked her everything, and she said she liked it. When he asked her what she liked most, the little woman, who must have watched too many TV shows on the iPad, leaned in his arms, blushed, and whispered, "I like you the most." Mo Jingshan paused, lowered his eyes to look at her deeply, and then he didn't know whether to laugh or cry. When they passed by several dessert shops, Jin Wan pointed to a milk tea shop and said excitedly that she wanted to drink that. Mo Jingshan turned to buy it for her, and Jin Wan finally let go of his hand and turned to look at another shop across the street. It was a cake shop that didn't look very big, but both the brand and the decoration were exquisite and luxurious, and the cake samples on display outside the shop were also very beautiful. Jin Wan stared at the beautiful cakes and couldn't help walking over. After entering the cake shop, she saw 2 female customers and several staff in work clothes. On the most conspicuous table in the front was a sky blue cake with 9 layers, on which there were dozens of little swans made of various kinds of sugar turning techniques, and other decorations made of sugar turning techniques. In short, it was a luxurious, beautiful, and delicious cake. Jin Wan stared straight at the cake, walked over, and looked at the vivid little swans on it. She reached out to touch them carefully, but because she knew they were food, she paused when she was about a finger away from them. Then she put down her hand resentfully and didn't dare to touch them. Jin Wan stared at the cake with her eyes fixed on it. She looked at the cake with a smile on her face. At this time, a sharp-eyed staff came over. Many people here were Chinese. Seeing that Jin Wan was dressed like a Chinese, she came over and pushed Jin Wan, who didn't dare to touch the cake, aside. "Hey, miss, this 9-layer cake has been ordered by the 2 beauties next to you, and it's very expensive. Don't touch it." Chapter 709. You'd better not touch it. This is food. You don't know how many germs there are on your hands. If you touch it, the beauty who ordered the cake will be unhappy and return the cake. I'm afraid you can't afford to pay for it. Seeing Jin Wan acting so timid and ignorant, the staff member rolled her eyes at her and pushed the trolley with the cake aside. Seeing the staff member acting so cautiously, Jin Wan didn't understand the contempt in her eyes and asked instinctively, "Is this very expensive?" The staff turned to look at her again and looked up and down for a while. Seeing that she was obviously not wearing cheap clothes and was dressed very fashionably, but she looked silly, she immediately laughed at her for being so naive. "Of course it's expensive. It took us 3 days and 3 nights to make this cake. Not to mention the carefully made decorations and swans, even the 9-layer cake embryo is not cheap. The price of the whole cake is 158,000 yuan. I guess you just look at it out of curiosity. You can't afford it in your life. Jean Wan had no concept of money. When she heard 158,000 yuan, she nodded confusedly. Oh, in her mind, cakes should be very delicious, but how much was 158,000 yuan? It didn't seem to be much, right? Because Shinshin brought her food, necessities, and the hotel she stayed in. Although she didn't see Shinshin pay with a credit card like others, she saw that the prices of many places were 6 or 7 digits. Now she heard him say 158,000 yuan so proudly, so it must be a lot of money, right? Are you scared? Seeing Jean Wan's dumbfounded expression, the staff member snorted smugly. If you want to eat cake, go to the cake shop diagonally across the street to buy it. Most of them are thousands of yuan, and the cheapest ones are 200 or 300 yuan. Our shop sells all the high-grade sugar cakes and all the high-end styles in advance. Any cake is 6 digits. You can't afford it. Just take a look and leave. But you can just take a look, but don't touch it. These cakes are very expensive. If you break one, I won't be able to explain it to you. Jean Wan nodded obediently and did not speak anymore. She thought about it and felt that it might be really expensive. She had better not let Shinshin spend money on her, so she turned to leave. Seeing her like this, the staff snorted and continued to work, not planning to pay any more attention to her. However, just as Jean Wan was about to walk out of the door, a very fashionably dressed beauty came in. The beauty was holding a bag in her hand and walked in at a fast speed. She was in such a hurry that she directly bumped into Jean Wan. Jean Wan's head couldn't stand the violent impact, nor could it stand the shaking after being hit. Her head hurt and she couldn't stand firmly. She subconsciously put her hand on the table frame to support herself. She was about to turn around when she suddenly heard a loud curse behind her. Are you blind? Why are you standing here and blocking the way? Jean Wan jerked back to look at the woman. The woman paused and stared at Jean Wan in shock for a long time. Jean Wan. Jean Wan was a little angry because this woman didn't apologize for bumping into her and was so rude to her. She didn't expect that the woman knew her name and immediately looked at her again. This woman was Yi. She used to be a socialite in High City, but her family moved to Argentina when she was 15 or 16. When they were children, Yi and Ji Mengran had a good relationship. Although Ji Mengran didn't show any obvious rift between her and Jean Wan, Yi liked to exclude Jean Wan and even often mocked her since they were children. Jean Wan didn't recognize her and didn't remember those things. Even if she was sober now, she might not be able to recall these unimportant memories immediately. Seeing that Jean Wan seemed to be in a daze, Yi thought she was just too surprised, so she immediately walked over and looked her up and down. Long time no see, Jean Wan. If I hadn't seen you here today, I would have almost forgotten that there is a person like you in this world. I haven't asked about the social circle in High City for many years. How are you? How is Ji Mengran? I haven't contacted you and your sister for many years. Jean Wan didn't know this woman and said truthfully, I don't know you. Yi paused, and the contempt in her eyes suddenly turned into anger. She had said that she had almost forgotten Jean Wan's existence on purpose, but Jean Wan looked as if she really didn't remember her, as if she had completely ignored her. After all, she was one of her childhood playmates. How could she forget her just like that? She did it on purpose, didn't she? Yi sneered. It's fine if you don't know me. I don't care if you know me or not. A few years ago, I spoke to Ji Mengran on the phone. I heard that you seem to be married, but she didn't say who you married. I didn't have time to contact you later. I don't know who married you, Miss G. I'm really curious. Jean Wan didn't understand what she said and didn't have any impression of the names she mentioned. She just felt a headache and turned to go out to find Mo Jingshan. Yi thought that Jean Wan didn't want to talk about her marriage, so she instinctively suspected that Jean Wan was divorced or had an unhappy marriage, so she didn't want to talk about it, so she said sharply, "Tut, the eldest daughter of the Ji family seems to be living a miserable life. Alas, don't be too sad. There are many people who are unhappy in their marriages. Just make do with it. Anyway, life is only a few decades, and it doesn't matter whether you feel wronged or not." With that, she said with a smile, "But I'm different. My husband is the eldest son of a political family in Argentina, and now he is the general manager of this island resort. My marriage is very happy." At this time, the staff of the cake shop suddenly came over and said fawningly, "Miss E, do you know this lady? She seems to come in to see the cake. Just now, she almost touched the cake you ordered. After I told her the price, she was shocked." Yi looked at Jean Wan with a faint smile. "Shocked? Is it necessary? Has the G Corporation declined so much that Miss G can't even afford a cake worth more than 100,000 yuan? Chapter 710. Don't say that. She has been good at pretending to be stupid since she was a child. No one can find fault with her, but in fact, she is very cunning," Yi said as her eyes fell on Jean Wan's clothes again. "No matter how unhappy your marriage is, you still have to live, don't you? But seeing that you still have the capital to be young and beautiful, if you really can't live with your current husband, I can introduce you to some rich men. But most of these men are not young, and they all have wives and children. They just like to come out to play. They can give you a lot of money to sleep with them. Do you want to meet them?" Jean Wan seemed to have completely blocked out her words. She raised her hand and pressed her forehead with a headache. Seeing her so stubborn, Yi's words seemed to have hit cotton. She clearly remembered that although Jean Wan didn't seem to have any personality in the past, in fact, she refused to suffer any losses. Otherwise, how could the Ji family's eldest daughter's arrogant and domineering personality have spread? And Jean Wan was also very mean. However, her current expression made Yi feel strange, and she was also unhappy about being ignored. At this time, the two female customers who had been inside came up to Yi. "Cousin, we've finished the order for the cake. Do you need us to buy other things for you?" "No, you can go back first." "Oh, by the way, ask my husband to come over," Yi said in a sweet voice. The two beauties nodded and left. Jean Wan also wanted to leave, but Yi took her arm and didn't let her go. When Jean Wan was impatient, a very tall man came in. The man had black hair, black eyes, and a fashionable beard, but he looked like a Westerner. He was an Argentinian. Honey, seeing the man come in, Yi immediately let go of Jean Wan's hand, turned to the man at the door, and hugged him intimately. Then she turned to Jean Wan and said, "Let me introduce her to you. Her name is Jean Wan. We grew up together when we were in High City." The man looked at Jean Wan expressionlessly and held Yi in his arms. "Honey, I thought you wanted me to help you get the cake. What's the point of introducing a childhood friend like you? As for the cake, the staff here will be responsible for delivering it. Is the matter here settled? Shall we go back now?" "Great. Wait a minute, I have something to do," Yi said intimately as she turned around to speak to the staff. The staff nodded and immediately said to Jean Wan, who was having a headache, "Don't block the way. We're going to ship the cake out. Don't delay our business. If Miss Yi's cake can't be delivered on time, you'll have to compensate us for our lost time," Jean Wan said with a smile. Jean felt that these people were very strange. Their words were all strange. Although she couldn't understand them, she felt strangely uncomfortable. She turned to look at the door. When she saw the figure outside, she felt a lot more at ease. She wanted to laugh but couldn't, so she forced a smile. Didn't look at Jean face, so she didn't notice the expression on Jean face. There was no deep hatred between them. She just wanted to bully Jean verbally and show off her husband to show her how good she was now. After all, when she was a child, her family was not as rich as the G family. Although she had a good relationship with G Mengran, she was still inferior to them in front of the G family, which was a psychological shadow. She finally won a round on this island after so many years, and now she was really happy. "Honey, let's go." After showing off, put her arm around the man's arm and the two of them turned around intimately to go out. However, at the moment they turned around, E's husband froze and looked at the man who had been standing outside the door for a long time. At first, he didn't dare to recognize him, but after a few seconds, his expression changed. "CEOMO." E was startled when she heard the way he addressed her, but she quickly understood what was going on. Her husband was sent by Argentina to take charge of this island, but the real boss of this island was CEOMO, the big boss of Shine Group. The man who could make her husband call him in such a cautious and surprised way must be the legendary boss Missouri, Mo Jingshan. E hurriedly put on a polite smile. "Hello, CEOMO." Mo Jingshan's face was expressionless. With his back to the people on the street, his body seemed to be condensed into a layer of cold, emotionless ice, and his frost-like eyes fell on them. Being stared at by his eyes, Yi's legs softened and she subconsciously looked at her husband. However, when her husband also didn't understand what was going on, Mo Jingshan's cold eyes passed them and looked at Jean. "Which cake do you like?" Jean pursed her lips and didn't speak. She knew she was sick and confused. She didn't want to cause trouble for Shinshin, so she just shook her head quietly and didn't say anything. However, when Mo Jingshan spoke to Jean in a very patient tone, not only the staff in the cake shop, but also E and her husband were stunned. The air in the cake shop seemed to freeze in an instant. "CEOMO, you." E's husband said tentatively and cautiously. E didn't understand what was going on. Mo Jingshan had completely ignored them and walked in. When he brushed past them, E couldn't help shivering because of his cold aura. She looked at her husband for help and asked in a low voice, "What's going on? Why is CEOMO here?" The point was, why did he seem to be familiar with Jean? A woman's sixth sense gave her a very bad feeling. Could it be? Mo Jingshan walked up to Jean, looked at her who seemed to be aggrieved but didn't want to say anything, raised his hand and stroked her head comfortingly. "I helped you line up to buy milk tea, but then I couldn't see you. Which cake do you like?" Jean raised her hand and pointed to the 9-layer blue cake behind her. "I just thought it looked good, so I came in to take a look, but they said it was very expensive and I couldn't afford it." "Is that so?" Mo Jingshan didn't get angry but looked at the staff with a smile. His smile seemed to be cold. Chapter 7:11. When E turned around and saw Mo Jingshan gently holding Jean in his arms, her eyelids twitched hard and she had a feeling that she was about to die. The employees of the cake shop didn't understand what was going on. At this time, the manager of the cake shop came down from the production room on the second floor. The moment he saw Mo Jingshan, he was shocked. He had heard the noise downstairs and thought someone had come in to make trouble. He didn't come down to see what had happened, but he knew what had happened. Now that she saw Mo Jingshan here and how much he cared about the little woman in front of him, the manager staggered down the stairs and hurriedly came over to apologize. CEOMO, it's a misunderstanding, it's all a misunderstanding. It's our employees' fault. They're used to interacting with foreigners and have become careless and careless. It's all our fault for not managing them well. Mo Jingshan coldly glanced at Jin Wan again. Jin Wan didn't understand why these people suddenly changed their attitudes, so she stood in front of him in a daze and didn't speak. CEOMO, are you here to inspect the island project? Or do you have any other activities arranged? Why didn't you inform us in advance? We could have arranged it, but you. Yi's husband also felt that something was wrong, so he came up and spoke politely and ingratiatingly. Seeing that her husband was being coldly ignored, Yi thought for a moment and moved closer to Mo Ting. She said carefully, President Mo, it's rare for you to visit an island in Argentina. This unique street is meant for tourists. Why don't we invite you to a quieter place? The people here are all messy and not suitable for you. Mo Jingshan coldly glanced at her. Who are you? As soon as Yi saw the coldness in his eyes, her heart couldn't help trembling. She raised her hand to take her husband's arm, saying, I'm his wife, but I lived in High City for more than 10 years when I was a child. I've heard of the Mo family's name, and then I've heard of you, CEO Mo. Seeing the coldness in Mo Jingshan's eyes that could almost penetrate people's hearts, Yi saw Jin Wan's dazed look in front of Mo Jingshan and felt that although they seemed to be very familiar with each other, she thought that maybe they just knew each other and met here by chance. They shouldn't have a deep relationship. Therefore, Yi took the opportunity to add, but CEO Mo, when I lived in High City, I knew what kind of person Miss Ji was. She's not a good person, it's better if you don't interact with her. I heard she's the illegitimate daughter of the Ji family. Heard? Mo Jingshan's smile was cold, but his eyes were so dark that no one could see through them. He sneered. Did she offend you? Seeing that CEO Mo was talking to her, Yi instinctively felt that her lucky guess was probably right. There should be no relationship between him and Jin Wan. She hurriedly turned around and pointed to the 9-layer blue cake that had not been wrapped up by the shop assistant. In fact, I didn't offend her. It's just that I had ordered this cake in advance and planned to give it to my husband's great-grandmother. She's already 90 years old, and we specially ordered a 9-layer cake, but Jin Wan was so ungrateful that she insisted on touching it. How can food be touched? If she touched it, would other people eat it? The shop assistant scolded her, but she didn't seem to be convinced. She kept coming back and forth, making others think there might be a dispute here, but in fact, it's not. Before Yi finished her long speech, Jin Wan whispered in a voice that only he could hear, I didn't touch it. I know it's for people to eat. I just came over to have a look out of curiosity, but I withdrew my hand before I touched it. I didn't touch it. However, before Yi finished her rambling, Mo Jingshan glanced indifferently at the 9-layer cake not far behind Jin Wan. Because there were too many layers, it had to be carefully placed on the cart. Otherwise, it would easily collapse or shift, which would affect the appearance of the cake. He glanced at the bottom of the cake, which was fixed by a round plate on the cart, and then at Jin Wan. The little woman was very aggrieved, but she didn't show it on her face. Obviously, her good mood for shopping today was affected. The cake is well made. Push it over and let me have a look. The man's emotionless voice rang. The clerk of the cake shop paused and didn't know whether to push the cart over or not, but the person in charge of the shop who had just run downstairs did not dare to be negligent at all. He hurriedly pushed the cart to Mo Jingshan and said with a big smile, CEO Mo, in fact, our desserts and cakes are also very special on this special street. Although they are expensive for a reason. Many of our dessert-making techniques are new, and we make whatever is popular. And look at the technique of turning the sugar. Ordinary cake shops can't make such a lifelike effect. However, as soon as the manager finished speaking, Mo Jingshan raised his long leg and kicked the cart expressionlessly. The 9-layer cake of more than 2 meters immediately fell to one side. In the end, the cake, along with all the cream and sugar decorations on it, fell to the ground, and the cart hit the wall not far away as if it had lost its balance, making a deafening sound. In an instant, the entire cake shop was silent. Yi raised her head in shock to look at Mo Jingshan's bone-chilling gaze. Mo, CEO Mo. As if he finally saw the danger in his eyes, Yi's husband stood there in disbelief. Even though the 9-layer cake had fallen to the ground and the cream on the ground looked dirty, he didn't dare to say a word. Who gave you the courage to show off your superiority in front of my wife? Mo Jingshan's voice sounded careless, but in fact, it was frighteningly cold. Yi's face trembled, and so did her husband's. Yi stiffened as she looked at the coldness in Mo Jingshan's eyes. As if finally realizing something, she jerked her head to look at Jin Wan, who was still standing there with an indifferent expression, and no one could tell what she was thinking. How could it be? Yi was so nervous that her palms were cold. CEO Mo, what did you say? Did I hear it wrong? What? Your wife? She even began to stutter when she spoke, praying from the bottom of her heart that she had heard wrongly. Chapter 7:12. Mo Jingshan didn't reply to her but raised his eyebrows expressionlessly and looked at her coldly. How does it feel to smash a cake? Yi didn't dare to raise her head guiltily. She didn't know what to say and could only reluctantly answer, It's fine, as long as CEO Mo is happy. Mo Jingshan chuckled. I'm happy. Yes, as long as CEO Mo is happy. Yi nodded incoherently. If you want to make me happy, you have to pay a certain price. Hearing the coldness in Mo Jingshan's cold voice that only she could feel, Yi didn't know how she had offended a god like him and didn't know what to do at all. She was even more flustered. Was Jin Wan really his wife? All of a sudden, Mo Jingshan pointed to the nearest 7-layer cake in the window and signaled the shop assistant with his eyes to push the cake over to her. Yi's eyes froze and she looked up at Mo Jingshan. Smash it. Mo Jingshan spat out these cold words, and his eyes were cold without any warmth. Yi trembled all over. Even though Mo Jingshan was sneering, his smile was still bewitching. Didn't you say that as long as I'm happy? But smash it. Mo Jingshan didn't give her a chance to say another word and stared at her coldly like a knife. Yi was stunned, but she didn't dare to be careless under his icy gaze. She reached out and picked up the 7-layer cake, which was very heavy. Because of this action, she got cream all over her body, but she didn't dare to say a word. After a few seconds of hesitation, she gritted her teeth and threw the entire cake to the ground. The 2 giant cakes fell to the ground, and the cream and cake spread out in a mess. The sweet smell of cream in the air didn't make people feel the slightest sweetness. They only felt the silent smoke of gunpowder approaching. Seeing the broken cake on the ground, the shop assistants didn't dare to speak, and Yi's husband didn't dare to say anything. He didn't even dare to say a word to defend Jin Wan. The noise attracted the attention of passers-by, and many people began to watch from outside. Continue. Mo Jingshan's voice was clear and cold. His gaze mildly glanced at the dozens of cakes in the shop, large and small. Many of them were reserved for today, and some were new samples made a few days ago. The employees saw Mo Jingshan's gaze and guessed what he meant, but no one dared to speak, much less step forward to stop the development of the situation. At first, these employees didn't know who CEO Mo was, but since the person in charge of the store was so respectful to him, it was obvious that he was the owner of this island. It was said that the owner of this island had the surname Mo, so it should be him without a doubt. Who would dare to provoke this great god? They simply didn't want to live in Argentina and this island where every inch of land was worth its weight in gold. CEOMO, this one should be enough. This Mo Jingxian ignored her words and coldly glanced at her face. Do you want to smash it, or do you want me to ask your husband to smash it? Trembled all over. If her husband was involved, it wouldn't be easy. After all, Mo Jingxian was the owner of this island, and her husband was the general manager of this island authorized by Shine Group. If this big boss was provoked, her husband would probably, then the loss would not be as simple as just a cake. She hurriedly turned to pick up the other 2 small cakes in the window and smashed them hard on the ground. More and more people gathered outside the shop, pointing at who was smashing the cakes. She had been domineering on this island with her husband for several years, and many businessmen were unhappy with her. Now that they saw her smashing the cakes, they couldn't help talking about her, thinking that she was crazy, and more people came to watch the fun. Continue. Mo Jingxian's voice was still cold. But as he spoke, he glanced at Jean Wan, who had been silent. Yi's eyes were red, but she didn't dare to delay and smashed the cakes one by one. Seeing Mo Jingxian's expression, the shop assistant didn't dare to be negligent and took the initiative to carry the cakes far away from her over one by one for her to smash. The cream and cakes by Yi's feet were almost piled up into a mountain. She was in a mess, and a lot of cream was stuck to her body, so she turned to pick up other cakes and smashed them. Finally, all the cakes in the shop were smashed, and the floor was covered with cream. It was a messy scene that couldn't be cleaned up. Yi just thought she could breathe a sigh of relief, when Mo Jingxian suddenly looked coldly at the shop assistant hiding by the side and said coldly, "Bring all the finished and unfinished cakes in your production room." The shop assistant looked surprised, and so did Yi. But seeing Mo Jingxian's eyes, the shop assistant instinctively rushed upstairs to fetch them. The onlookers outside the shop had almost completely blocked the entrance. Jean Wan stood in front of Mo Jingxian and watched this scene. Many strange images of Mo Jingxian appeared in her mind. It seemed that this man often supported her like this and protected her all the time. She paused for a moment, then turned to look at Yi, whose face was as white as a sheet. Jean Wan didn't really understand the current situation, but she felt inexplicably good from the bottom of her heart. She was especially happy, and all the unhappiness in her heart seemed to have disappeared. She raised her hand and gently tugged on Mo Jingxian's sleeve, whispering, "Shinshin, I don't want to stay here anymore." At this time, the shop assistant brought down the cakes and desserts from the production room. Seeing Jean Wan coquettishly and relying on Mo Jingxian, Yi's face stiffened, and when she saw the desserts that had been brought down, her face turned pale. "What are you doing here? Give it to her. Keep smashing." Mo Jingxian held Jean Wan in his arms and gently patted her shoulder comfortingly as he spoke coldly and indifferently. "CEOMO, can I stop smashing? There's no more cake on the floor." Yi's eyes were red and she wanted to beg for mercy. "Don't you like this cake shop very much? Aren't you very proud?" Mo Jingxian said unhurriedly and coldly, "You feel sorry for smashing a few cakes." "No, CEOMO, I have to remind you that all the cakes smashed today will be under your name." Yi's legs immediately weakened and she almost fell to the ground, but the ground was covered with cream. She hurriedly raised her hand to support herself on the table by the side and barely managed to stand. Chapter 7:13. Looking at the mess on the ground, the manager of the cake shop couldn't help saying in a low voice, "CEOMO, we've taken out all the cake embryos and semi-finished products. After Miss E smashes them, we still have a lot of things to buy." "Well, why don't we call it a day?" Mo Jingxian glanced at him coldly. "Do you think this cake shop can still operate?" The manager's expression immediately stiffened, and the faces of the shop assistants turned pale. It seemed that Jin Wan was really Mo Jingshan's wife, and Mo Jingshan was trying to stand up for her. As a woman, Yi could tell that she had no choice but to suffer losses, but she was most worried about whether her husband's work on this island would be affected. She looked at Mo Jingshan with red eyes, but at this time, Mo Jingshan ignored everyone's gaze, picked up his cell phone, and dialed who knows where. Investigate the hygiene situation of the Royal Dessert Shop on Wonderful Life Street. Find out the legal person and the boss behind this shop. I want this shop to disappear in 24 hours, and hand over the manager and the boss to the Argentine Department of Industry and Commerce for investigation. In addition, stop all the joint projects between Argentina and Chinese companies. There's no need to follow up. Hearing Mo Jingshan's words, Yi felt as if she had fallen into an ice cave. Her husband immediately frowned and gave her a reproachful look. Her husband was the eldest son of a political family in Argentina. The cooperation with this island was specially requested by many political representatives of Argentina and Shine Group. After all, the whole world knew that China was a big tourism country, and they all wanted to get in touch with big Chinese companies. This island had been very popular in the past 2 years and was the main cornerstone of Argentina's tourism development. Now this not only affected his work on this island, but also caused him to lose tens of millions of yuan a year. Now if Shine Group wanted to terminate the cooperation, it would be the loss of the entire tourism industry that Argentina planned to develop. When he returned, he would have to face a huge responsibility, and it was likely that he would never be able to raise his head again. Yi also understood the seriousness of this matter and felt as if the sky was going to collapse. Even when Mo Jingshan hung up the phone, Yi was still in a daze. Mo Jingshan coldly watched her. In addition, all the accounts under your names will be frozen in 5 minutes. The island has been ruled by you and your wife for far too long. Many of the sources of funds need to be thoroughly investigated. As for everything in this cake shop, it will be considered as additional debts that you have to bear. At the same time, he calmly looked at the trembling shop assistants. Those who don't want to be implicated, immediately calculate the accounts of these cakes and hand them to her, and urge her to settle all debts within 24 hours. Otherwise, Shine Group has the right to ban this shop and send you to the Bureau of Industry and Commerce for investigation. Your names will also be sent to the Consumer Reporting Center in Argentina. The shop assistant's eyes were so wide that an egg could be stuffed inside. Yi was so angry that she couldn't say a word. Jin Wan tugged on Mo Jingshan's shirt and looked at him pleadingly. Mo Jingshan knew that she didn't want to stay here, so he helped her solve the problem. Without saying anything more, he took her hand and turned to walk out. When they reached the door, after the crowd outside learned of Mo Jingshan's identity, no one dared to block the way. They consciously opened up a path for them. Mo Jingshan directly brought Jin Wan to the milk tea shop opposite. Jin Wan finally saw that there was a cup of milk tea and coffee on the round table by the window. Earlier, he was queuing here to buy milk tea for her. She didn't expect that the milk tea would really be sold out. He must have turned around and found her missing, so he came to look for her. Jin Wan was led over by him to sit down. She picked up the milk tea and took a sip. It was very sweet. Her mood, which had already been greatly relieved, instantly became even better. She raised her eyes to look at him. Shin, did I cause you trouble earlier? The man curved his lips, gently saying, No, it's just that some people don't know what's good for them and seek their own deaths out of habit. Jin Wan looked at him, half understanding. She felt that what happened earlier did not seem to affect them. She turned to look out the window. From her position, she could see the scene of the cake shop that was about to be banned. Yi and her husband were arguing about something. The tall Argentinian man, who did not dare to speak earlier, even gave Yi, who was in a sorry state, a slap on the face. He then angrily turned to leave. Yi was pestered by the shop assistants for money. She was battered and exhausted. Outside, many people were pointing fingers and criticizing her. Jinwon watched the situation while drinking her milk tea. "Do you want to eat cake?" Mo Jingshan asked. She bit on the straw on the cup of milk tea and shook her head. "Not today. Let's talk about it in 2 days." Earlier, the smell of cream on the floor was so disgusting. "I don't want to eat it at all." The man chuckled softly. "It's your birthday in 2 days. I originally planned to bring you to a handmade cake shop to make a cake with you. But since you hate cake so much, forget it." Jinwon's gaze immediately rose, filled with excitement. "Make a cake together." "I want to. But I've never done it before. I don't know how." The man lightly curved his lips. "Didn't you say it was disgusting earlier?" "That's because the smell of the cake was too strong. It'll be fine in 2 days." Jinwon reached out to hold his fingers and begged, "Shinshin, I want to make a cake. I want to make a cake, I want to make a cake." As she spoke, she placed her chin on the table and looked up at him with wide, longing eyes. "I want to make a cake." Mo Jingshan had never seen Jinwon act so openly and coquettishly. When this woman was sober, she was extraordinarily prideful. She also had a temper. His heart seemed to melt from her stare. The man chuckled softly at her. "I'll make a cake with you on your birthday." Jinwon immediately sat up in excitement. As she drank her milk tea, she could not hide the anticipation on her face. In contrast to the scene in the milk tea shop, in the cake shop opposite, Yi lost her footing amidst the cake and cream on the floor. Her feet slipped and she fell into the pile of cream on the floor. When she staggered back up, the shop assistant was still pestering her because her card had been frozen and she could not pay for the cakes. Although Jinwon did not fully understand, she still felt that he was able to make a shop disappear in such a short period of time. He was also able to make those who bullied her so miserable. Chapter 7:14. Mo Jingshan accompanied Jinwon for a long time on the special side street. In the past, Jinwon also liked to buy all kinds of gadgets when she went shopping, and now she was no exception. Even though she was ill and her memory was confused, her hobby was still the same as before. After buying so many things, when they returned to the hotel, Jinwon was so tired that she didn't even want to go swimming. She lay on the bed and crawled under the quilt to sleep. Seeing that Jinwon fell asleep very quickly, he realized that she was really a heartless big baby who fell asleep as soon as she said she would. He watched her for a while with a smile, walked over to help her pull up the quilt, pushed back the hair on her cheek, and touched her head. After making sure she was sleeping comfortably, he turned to go to the sofa living room of the suite. As soon as he arrived in the living room, the manager of Shine Group in charge of regional tourism management in Argentina called him and asked nervously, "CEO Mo, do you really want to end the cooperation with Argentina on the Chinese tourism project?" "When I received the news, I thought I heard wrong. They said that you have cancelled the project qualification of Argentina." "You heard right. Do it." "Okay, I understand." Jinwon didn't know that Mo Jingshan could cook. When she was in the Yu Garden, Auntie Chen and the servants made all kinds of delicious and nutritious food for her. When Jinwon woke up, it was already past 9:00 in the evening. She tossed and turned in bed, unable to sleep. She turned to see the light in the sofa living room was on, so she lifted the quilt, got out of bed, and quietly opened the door, but she didn't see Mo Jingshan in the living room. This suite had its own kitchen. Jinwon leaned against the door and listened carefully for a while. She seemed to hear the sound of the range hood in the kitchen, so she tiptoed over and gently pushed open the kitchen's glass door. At a glance, she saw the man standing by the counter, cutting vegetables. Jean Wan stared at him blankly for a long time. When she realized that he seemed to be preparing to cook, she smiled. Thinking that he couldn't hear her, she tiptoed over, stretched out her arms, and hugged his waist tightly. Mo Jingshan knew she had woken up the moment she appeared outside the kitchen door. However, due to her sudden movement, he paused the knife in his hand and glanced sideways at the little woman who was holding him and pressing her face against his back. "Did you sleep well?" I'm so tired from walking on the streets during the day." "Did I sleep for a long time?" The man casually glanced at the sky outside the window. "Fortunately, it's not that long." In fact, Jean Wan slept for 5 hours. Sleep was very helpful to the absorption of blood into her brain, so Mo Jingshan did not intend to wake her up at dinner time. However, she was about to wake up, so there was no need to ask the hotel staff to specially send food over. He only asked the staff to send some ingredients and meat, and he would cook. It was just nice for Jean Wan to eat the food when she woke up. Jean Wan rubbed her face hard against his back and breathed in the scent of his clothes. "Shin, your body smells so good." Mo Jingshan chuckled softly, allowing her to continue hugging him as he methodically cut the vegetables. He said mildly, "What? You're so hungry after a night's sleep. Are you going to eat me up?" Hearing this, Jean Wan mischievously opened her mouth and bit his arm. She bit him quite hard, but the man did not even frown. He only turned to look at her. "Are you really going to eat me up?" Jean Wan blinked at him. "I said your body smells so good. It's not that kind of fragrance, but another kind. I don't know how to describe it, but it smells so good." Mo Jingshan curved his lips. Because his fingers were stained with vegetables, he raised his hand and pushed her little head away with the back of his hand. "Go, return to the living room and sit down. There are cut fruits on the coffee table. Go watch TV or use the iPad. When the food is ready, I'll call you to eat. Don't stand behind me like a hungry ghost." Jean Wan immediately pouted. "I just want to be with you." Mo Jingshan's smile deepened. "Then go bring a chair over and put it by the side. Sit there obediently and watch." "All right." Hearing this, Jean Wan immediately let go of his waist. She turned and ran out happily. Mo Jingshan could not help but furrow his brows when he heard her running. He said to the outside, "Run slowly. Don't fall." Qin Siding said that he had been accompanying Jean Wan every day and was becoming more and more like a worrisome old father. At this moment, Mo Jingshan finally understood the meaning of the word old father. He really couldn't take a single glance away from her. He couldn't be at ease even for a moment. Jean Wan ran out and looked around the room but could not find a chair. In the end, she ran into the study and brought out a chair. The chair was large and heavy, and it was difficult for her to carry it. After much difficulty, she finally moved it into the kitchen. Mo Jingshan had already turned on the stove, so it was not convenient for him to help her move it. He turned around and saw that the little woman was so tired that her face was red and she was panting heavily just to bring a chair in to watch him cook. He sighed with a smile. "Just put it by the door. Sit there and watch." "Okay." Jean Wan obediently put down the chair and sat down like an especially obedient primary school student. She placed her hands obediently on her lap and stared at him. Seeing her gaze, Mo Jingshan chuckled. "Were you hungry when you woke up?" Jean Wan nodded. The hotels on this island are not like those in China. They mainly serve seafood. Although the vegetables and meat are fresh, they are different from those in China. The taste may be slightly different. Try to eat some, and it smells so good. Shinshin, I can definitely eat a lot of the food you cook. Mo Jingshin smiled. You are sick, but your mouth has become much sweeter. Jin Wan looked at him. When I was not sick, did I eat the food you cooked? Yes. Did I say it was not delicious? Mo Jingshin raised his eyebrows and glanced at her. She did not say this, but every time she ate it, she would look particularly unwilling as if she did not want to eat it. She would never admit that it was delicious, but she would almost always finish it. In the end, when she was full, she would lean against the side and continue to play the role of a little ingrate. Especially after she returned from London, she did not admit it even once. No, you also liked to eat in the past, but I didn't have much time to accompany you, and you didn't get to eat it often, the man said and quickly put a dish on a plate. Chapter 7:15. Mo Jingshin glanced at the freshly cooked rice by the side. Wait a little longer. It's a little hot. Jin Wan made an "oh" sound and continued to sit there and wait patiently. When she could finally eat, Jin Wan jumped up in joy and couldn't help hugging Mo Jingshin again. Mo Jingshin was hugged by this little woman all the way. It was as though a koala bear was hanging from his body. He carried the food out, placed it in the dining room, and then hugged the little woman hanging from his body. He lowered his head and kissed her on the forehead tenderly. All right, go wash your hands and eat. Jin Wan raised her head and kissed him hard on the chin. She was about to turn to wash her hands when she suddenly paused and turned to look at him, saying, Shinshin, why is your body so hot? Mo Jingshin rubbed her hair. Maybe it's because I've been busy in the kitchen for a long time. It's a little hot. Go wash your hands. Jin Wan hesitated for a moment and then turned to the bathroom. When it was time to eat, Jin Wan asked Mo Jingshin to eat with her. She sat close to him and picked up food from time to time to bring it to his mouth, insisting on feeding him a few mouthfuls. Fortunately, the dishes Mo Jingshin made tonight were relatively light, and the two of them were used to it. In the past 2 days on the island, they could hardly live without seafood. Finally, they had a normal meal. Jin Wan had always liked his cooking. Even if she didn't remember it, she still ate with great relish. In the end, her stomach was almost bulging. She shouted that she couldn't eat anymore, but she still stuffed a few mouthfuls of food into her mouth. In the end, she was so full that she lay on the sofa and refused to move. By the time they finished eating, it was past 10:00 at night. Jin Wan had slept for 5 hours and was not sleepy at all. She simply sat on the sofa and watched TV. Mo Jingshin brought a blanket over for her and turned to work in the study. As the night deepened, Jin Wan was enjoying herself watching TV when she vaguely heard Mo Jingshin's low, heavy coughing coming from the study. She thought she had heard wrong and pricked up her ears to listen for a while. Not hearing anything, she continued to sit on the sofa and watch TV. After who knew how long, the door of the study opened. Jin Wan turned back and did not see his expression. She only saw him enter the kitchen, pour a glass of water, and return to the study with the glass. It wasn't until 1:00 in the evening that Jin Wan gradually felt sleepy again. However, she went shopping during the day and went straight to bed when she came back in the afternoon. She didn't take a shower at all. She still loved cleanliness. She got up and went back to the bedroom to take a comfortable bath. After the bath, she didn't know where she put the hairdryer. In the morning, Mo Jingshin had dried her hair, so she didn't pay much attention to where he put it. Jin Wan walked out while drying her hair. She looked around for a hairdryer but could not find one. She could only shout toward the study, Shinshin, I want to blow dry my hair. Where did you put the hairdryer? There was no response from the study. Jin Wan asked again, but there was still no response. Feeling strange, she walked over and carefully knocked on the door. Seeing that there was no movement inside, she was just about to ask if he was busy when she suddenly heard a muffled sound of something falling to the ground. The sound wasn't soft either. When Jean-Wan heard the sound, she subconsciously pushed the study door open. The light in the study was soft, and the computer on the table was open. Mo Jingshan was reading the company documents. However, Jean-Wan's gaze abruptly shifted down and saw Mo Jingshan lying on the ground. Shinshin. Jean-Wan saw that Mo Jingshan was lying on the ground and was startled. She rushed in and squatted by his side. She saw that his eyes were closed, and his handsome brows seemed to be wrinkled from discomfort. Jean-Wan stared at him in a daze and tentatively reached out to push him twice. Shinshin. What's wrong? Mo Jingshan opened his eyes slightly and saw the obvious fear in Jean-Wan's eyes. He instinctively wanted to get up to avoid scaring her, but after trying for a long time, he could not get up. He could only force himself to speak hoarsely, "It's nothing, go find the hotel staff and call a doctor over." Shinshin, what's wrong with you? Jean-Wan hurriedly nodded and reached out to touch his body. She found that his body was even hotter than when he was eating. When she saw that he had closed his eyes after speaking, she anxiously cried, "Shinshin, don't scare me, ah." "Shinshin, wake up." Mo Jingshan furrowed his brows but did not open his eyes. "Call a doctor." "Right, call a doctor." He had just asked her to call a doctor. Jean-Wan hurriedly stood up. In the end, she was in too much of a hurry, and her leg knocked hard against the chair by the side. Her entire body staggered and almost fell. She endured the pain and finally managed to steady herself. She rushed to run out, but she had only taken a few steps when she was suddenly attacked by a strong wave of dizziness. Her entire body swayed, and she leaned heavily against the door. Her head was pressed against the door, and she felt that it was especially heavy. No matter how hard she tried, she could not lift it up. Jean-Wan's head throbbed as she raised her hand to place it on top of her head. After a long time, she was unable to calm down. She used her hand to knock against her head and shook it. It was as though there was a thread of clarity reminding her that she had to call a doctor immediately. She could not delay any longer. In the end, she gritted her teeth and endured the pain in her head that felt as though it was about to explode. She staggered out of the room, opened the door, and shouted in a panic, "Is there anyone here? Someone, come, call a doctor." There was a hotel staff in charge of this suite nearby. When they heard Jean-Wan's panicked cries, they thought that something had happened and immediately rushed over. "Mrs. Mo. What's wrong?" The moment they saw Jean-Wan's pale face, lips, and body trembling, the staff thought that something had happened to her and reached out to support her. However, Jean-Wan shook her head and pointed in the direction of the study. "Go call a doctor." The staff understood her meaning and quickly walked in. When she pushed open the door of the study, she was shocked to see Mr. Mo lying on the ground. She was startled and hurriedly picked up the phone to inform the other staff downstairs. They would immediately send the best doctor here and make the necessary arrangements. Then she struggled to help Mo Jingshan up and said with a frown, "Mr. Mo's body is very hot. He must have a fever." "Mrs. Mo, did he eat anything tonight?" Jean-Wan returned with a shocked expression. She shook her head in confusion. "There's only rice, vegetables, and cooked beef. That shouldn't be. How could he have such a serious fever?" When Jean-Wan heard that Mo Jingshan seemed to have a serious fever, her eyes, which had just been crying, immediately turned red again. "I don't know." As she said this, Jean-Wan bit her lip and felt that she was particularly useless. Shinshin was so good to her, but she did not even know in advance that he had a fever and was unable to help him. She was so useless. When would she become the amazing version of herself in the video? Chapter 7:16. Although Mo Jingshan had suddenly fainted due to a high fever, he was able to open his eyes slightly by the time the doctor arrived. He hoarsely instructed them not to scare Jean Wan and to wait in the living room with her. He also instructed them not to say too much to scare her. After examining him, the doctor asked, "CEO Mo, do you have a history of stomach problems?" Mo Jingshan lay on the bed with his eyes closed, speaking hoarsely, "Yes. 2 years ago in Los Angeles, I worked day and night and didn't eat regularly for a long time. I was once sent to the hospital because of stomach spasms." "That's right. You're very healthy, but you have a history of stomach problems. You can eat anything on a normal diet, but it's not suitable for you to eat too much cold food for a long time. We've lived here for a long time, so we know the habits of the people here. Your main and secondary meals on the island for the past 2 days must have been mostly seafood. Your stomach was already a little uncomfortable. Did you drink anything like iced coffee after that?" Mo Jingshan raised his hand to rub his forehead, speaking hoarsely with a sigh. "I drank a few cups." The doctor nodded. "As expected, it's an acute gastritis caused by multiple stimuli. It's not a big problem, but it's best for you to eat a light diet. Right now, your body temperature is very high. After your fever goes down, take some antibiotics on time. You'll be fine in 2 days. There's no need to worry." Mo Jingshan did not say anything more. He glanced at the hotel staff who had just entered the bedroom. "Where is she?" "Mrs. Mo is in the living room. Don't worry, we've been comforting her, but she seems to be very worried about you. Her complexion is also very poor. Do you want the doctor to take a look at her?" Mo Jingshan raised his hand with difficulty, stopping the doctor from looking for her outside. "She's very resistant to the touch of an unfamiliar doctor. Just accompany her quietly." The staff nodded and did not say anything more. Westerners rarely took injections unless it was really necessary. After the doctor gave Mo Jingshan some medicine for his fever and gastritis, he instructed the hotel staff to prepare an ice pack to lower his body temperature. After confirming that there were no other problems with Mo Jingshan's body, he left. The doctor also said that he would stay in another room in the hotel tonight. If anything happened, he would immediately rush over. He told Mr. Mo not to worry. Mo Jingshan indifferently nodded. After everyone left, the hotel staff asked if they needed someone to stay behind to take care of him. However, Mo Jingshan indicated for them to leave, in case Jean Wan was not used to having so many people in the room. It was already late at night, past 2:00 in the morning. Jean Wan stood in the living room but was not sleepy at all. Standing by the window, she could see the azure sea. After the doctor and the others left, she did not dare to enter the bedroom. She heard from them that Shinshin's fever was very serious and that he needed to rest after taking the medicine. She was afraid that she would disturb him if she entered, so she had been standing outside. But after more than an hour, the more she couldn't see him, the more worried she became. She leaned forward and leaned her forehead against the floor-to-ceiling window. She stared blankly at the dark sea outside the window. On such a large island, one could see the ebb and flow of the tide at a fixed time every day. Right now, it was the time when the tide rose around the island. The calm sea slowly rose in the night, and the waves were much more turbulent than during the day, repeatedly beating against the beach and the reefs in the distance. Jean Wan stared outside in a daze, and many scenes kept circling in her mind. She closed her eyes and banged her head against the floor-to-ceiling window. It did not hurt much, but when her head banged against the cold window, it seemed to relieve the inexplicable swelling pain in her head. She closed her eyes, but the scene of Mo Jingshan falling on the floor of the study kept replaying. Jean Wan slowly furrowed her brows and raised her hand to press hard against her increasingly painful head. All of a sudden, she heard 2 light coughs from the bedroom. She opened her eyes with a jerk and rushed to run in. The fever medicine that Immerse had taken should have taken effect. His forehead was gradually covered in sweat, but at the same time, the medicine allowed him to fall into a deep sleep. Seeing the sweat on his forehead, Jean Wan walked over to the bedside. She took out a tissue from the box by the side and wiped it messily for him. Not long after, she saw that his forehead was covered in sweat again. Jean Wan continued to wipe it for him with reddened eyes. As she wiped, she said, "Shin, it's all my fault. I don't even know how to take care of you." In his sleep, Immerse seemed to have heard her voice. He furrowed his brows but did not wake up. Jean Wan reached out to pick up the ice pack that had fallen from his forehead and touched his forehead. She instinctively felt that his temperature was not as high as before. She stared at him for a moment and seemed to have thought of something. She threw away the tissue she had been holding and ran into the bathroom to fetch a basin of clean water. She then brought a clean white towel back to the bedside and wet the towel in the water. She wrung it until it was half dry and then, bit by bit, wiped the sweat off his forehead. After more than half an hour, he finally stopped sweating. Jean Wan placed her hand on his forehead again. After confirming that his fever was no longer high, she brought the water back to the bathroom. For the entire night, Jean Wan would occasionally return to the bedside to watch Immerse. She would also occasionally head to the living room to stand by the window and watch the waves outside. When the sky was about to brighten, she instinctively turned to enter the kitchen. Not long after, she came out and returned to the bedroom. 8:00. Immerse opened his eyes. His fever had already subsided during the night. After a good night's sleep, the moment he woke up, he no longer felt any discomfort. He was someone who rarely got sick, and it was rare for him to have a fever. Now that the fever had subsided, it was no big deal. However, he turned to see the little woman sleeping by the bedside. Seeing that Jean Wan did not seem to have a good rest, the man slowly raised his hand and rubbed her head. The moment his hand touched her, Jean Wan abruptly woke up. She raised her eyes to look at him. "You're awake." Immerse's raised hand suddenly stiffened. He stared into her eyes. Although her eyes were still drowsy from waking up, the sobriety that he had not seen for a long time struck his heart harshly. Jean Wan thought that he was feeling unwell. She stood up and reached out to touch his head. "Your fever is gone. Is your stomach uncomfortable? I used the leftover rice from last night to make porridge and have been cooking it in the rice cooker. It's just right for you to drink. I'll go get it for you." Jean Wan spoke and turned to leave. However, Immerse did not take his eyes off her back. Regardless of whether it was her gaze or the tone of her voice, he abruptly stood up, tugged the blankets off the bed, and walked out. He watched as Jean Wan turned to close the small window in the living room and then turned to head to the kitchen. He abruptly called out, "Jean Wan." Jean Wan's footsteps paused. She did not turn back. "Are you all right?" The man's voice carried a slight probing tone, but it carried at least 90% certainty. Jean Wan did not speak and continued to walk toward the kitchen. Immerse directly walked over. With his long legs, he caught up with her in a few steps. He held her shoulders and forcefully turned her body around. He lowered his eyes to look into her eyes. "Tell me, are you all right? Awake? Have you remembered everything?" N. Dash. Chapter 7:17. The moment Jean Wan was turned around, she could not hide the redness in her eyes. "Isn't it all because you scared me? Otherwise, I would have continued to be silly for a while longer. There was no need to say more. Just this sentence alone was enough to move Mo Jingxin. The man's hands held her shoulders tightly. He looked into her eyes. Who am I? Jin Wan stared at him. After holding it in for a long time, she finally said, Mo Jingxin. She placed a heavy emphasis on these 3 words. There was even a sense of distance between them. However, this stubborn and unyielding temper was truly her. I'll go get some porridge for you. You didn't seem to be sick before, but you suddenly collapsed on the ground. I was so scared that my soul almost left my body, Jin Wan said as she pushed him. However, not only did he not push her away, but the man who had always been indifferent and calm suddenly smiled as if he couldn't hide it no matter how hard he tried. He was about to hug her when Jin Wan quickly blocked his chest. Hey! Let me get a bowl of porridge first. The man ignored her actions. He pulled her hand down and held it firmly in his palm. He then pulled her into his embrace. Jin Wan could not resist and could only hammer his shoulders several times. She could only hear the man's low and hoarse voice by her ear. Your head doesn't hurt anymore. Jin Wan paused and shook her head. It was much better a few days ago. Some things always appear before my eyes. It's as though when I sleep, I'm awake for a while. However, I'm always asleep, but many things in my dreams are clear and no longer as messy. Yesterday, I was scared by you again, otherwise, I might have been able to continue acting like a fool in front of you for a few more days. The doctor said that you can't be agitated right now. Otherwise, your emotions will be affected. If I had known that agitating you would be effective, I would have long since laid on the ground. The man rubbed her head as he spoke. Were you badly frightened last night? Nonsense. A grown man suddenly lying on the ground. Even I would be frightened when I'm normal, much less when I was in that state. Jin Wan poked his waist as she spoke. Can you let me go to the kitchen to bring the porridge out? If it boils any longer, it'll turn into soup. I'll drink the soup too. There's no rush. Jin Wan, but I haven't eaten breakfast yet. I want to eat too. I don't want to drink rice soup. Mo Jingxin's hand rubbed the back of her head as though to confirm if there were any problems with her head injuries. He then lowered his eyes to look at her. He saw that although the little woman was saying all sorts of lukewarm words, her ears were already completely red. Even her fair neck was stained with a pink hue. Feeling the man finally let go of her, Jin Wan quickly took 2 steps back and raised her hand to rub her cheeks and ears unnaturally, as though trying to cover the red and hot places. Thinking that he couldn't see it, she turned and rushed into the kitchen. The porridge had been cooked for a long time and did not really turn into soup. After all, the white rice on this island did not have the same texture as the ones in China. The texture was slightly hard, but now that it was cooked, it was fragrant, sweet, and soft. The texture was just right. Mo Jingxin had a high fever last night, so this porridge was relatively light and easy to digest. Jin Wan was not sure if she had really recovered, but at the very least, she felt that she was no longer as muddle-headed. Although she felt her head was especially heavy and tired when she tried hard to think, and her brain even hurt a little, it was likely that she needed to recover bit by bit. Last night, she stood by the window in a daze for a long time. For a long time, she forced herself to think about things and straighten out those messy and disorderly memories bit by bit. After those memories were straightened out, many things that she did not understand were gradually solved, and she began to remember more things. For the time being, she did not overuse her brain. If she tried too hard to think about more things, she would not feel uncomfortable. For her to be able to recover in such a short period of time, it was likely due to Mo Jingxin's meticulous company and care. On the other hand, it was likely that the upgraded targeted medicine developed by Dr. Chen's friend in the research institute was extremely effective. She was already extremely lucky to be able to keep her life. Right now, Jean Wan's heart was not thinking about anything else. She found that she had walked between life and death more than once, and it was truly a different feeling. After scooping the porridge, she turned to leave when she abruptly saw Mo Jingshan leaning against the kitchen door with his arms crossed. A pair of black eyes that were as calm as the sea was watching her. Jean Wan walked over and was about to bring the porridge to the dining table to call him to eat. However, before she could even take 2 steps, the man's hand had already reached over. Using the advantage of his height and long legs, he could almost completely hug her. He reached out and picked up the spoon in the bowl in front of her. At the same time, he scooped a spoonful of porridge and put it back. Jean Wan did not understand what he was trying to do. She could not help but turn back to look at him, only to see that the man only tasted a mouthful of the porridge she cooked. It seemed like he had not eaten anything she cooked for a long time. It was clearly just porridge, but Jean Wan subconsciously observed his expression. How does it taste? I put a small amount of fine salt and minced vegetables and meat powder in the porridge. After all, you need to replenish your strength after sweating from a fever. It won't do if there's no taste at all. The man took a sip and did not speak. He gestured for her to turn around. Jean Wan turned around and allowed him to continue tasting it. After standing in front of the kitchen door and casually drinking 2 or 3 mouthfuls, the man looked at her expressionlessly. Didn't you taste it first? I cooked it in a hurry and have been cooking it in the rice cooker. I just opened it earlier and haven't had a chance to taste it. Jean Wan glanced at the bowl in her hand as she spoke. She reached out to pick up the spoon he had just used to take a sip. However, the moment she moved, the man picked up the spoon in the bowl and took another sip. Jean Wan. She thought that he did not want her to use his spoon. She only glanced at him and did not say anything. However, just as Jean Wan was about to turn around to place the bowl on the table, the man bent down and approached her. Jean Wan abruptly looked at the face that remained incomparably handsome despite being sick for an entire night. Her gaze faltered. What are you doing? The man smiled mildly and was about to kiss her. Jean Wan finally realized that he intended to feed it to her. However, she understood his intentions. The man paused just as he was about to press his lips against hers. Then, Jean Wan heard the sound of the man swallowing the porridge. So what exactly was he trying to do? Jean Wan looked at him strangely. Seeing the little woman's confused expression, Mo Jingshan sighed with a smile. Forget it. I just had a fever last night. If I feed it like this, it'll be easy for me to infect you. Chapter 7:18. Mo Jingshan's elegant and deep brows moved slightly. You mean I can kiss you? Jean Wan, before the incident in Los Angeles, no matter in Jing City or anywhere else, didn't he kiss her whenever he wanted to? Was he trying to take advantage of her now? Or was he beginning to restore his old, cunning character, knowing that she had let go of the knot in her heart? Jean Wan rolled her eyes at him. No. With that, she quickly went to the dining table, put down the bowl, and hurried back to the kitchen. As she walked, she said, You eat first. I'll get myself another bowl. I'm so hungry. Mo Jingshan glanced at her and did not say much. He went to the dining table as he was told. When Jean Wan came out with another bowl, she also brought 2 sets of cutlery over. She handed the cutlery to Mo Jingshan. The man watched her as she lowered her head to eat the porridge and said casually, After you woke up, you refused to look at me even when you were eating. So, a few days ago, the little rascal who kept hugging and kissing me, and even clung to me and refused to leave, was it you? Jean Wan, a person's subconscious would inevitably have some unrestrained side, such as the childish side or the wild side. But what she showed Mo Jingshan was the most innocent, childish, pure, and harmless side. Jean Wan bit the spoon, raised her head to glance at him, and asked vaguely, "Don't you think that's stupid?" "You're not stupid. It's a little cute. Especially when you clung to me and refused to leave, and kept asking me if I had something good in my pants." Jean Wan, calm down, calm down. She couldn't let him off so easily just because of a life-and-death crisis in Los Angeles. Jean Wan soaked in the pool and held her breath for a long time, but this time, her brain injury was indeed serious. In the past, she could swim, and she could hold her breath in the water for much longer than now. Now, after holding her breath for a few seconds, she would have a headache because of the lack of oxygen. She had to come out of the water to take a few deep breaths before diving back in again. After repeating this for a long time, the time he could hold his breath gradually lengthened. He kept chanting in his heart, "Calm down, I have to calm down." Originally, Jean Wan did not plan on coming out to swim again. However, the doctor who came last night came to check on Mo Jingshan today to see if his gastritis had improved. Jean Wan did not enter. She stayed on the sofa in the living room for a while and planned to come out for a walk. Mo Jingshan knew that she was no longer muddle-headed and allowed her to come out, but she was not allowed to leave the hotel. This hotel's business was very good. There were many people in the front, but only the exclusive area near the suite and the separate swimming pool were empty, so Jean Wan simply came here. By the side, there were new bath towels and swimsuits delivered to her according to her measurements every day. Jean Wan sat by the pool for a while before changing into her swimsuit and entering the water. The doctor had already left. Mo Jingshan only had a sudden attack of gastritis. His fever had subsided, and he had taken some anti-inflammatory medicine and eaten a light diet for a few days. He should be fine now. The man stood in front of the window and looked at the round blue swimming pool in the green grass opposite the window. The white figure swam around like a mermaid in it, and then very consciously practiced holding his breath to train the intensity of oxygen in his brain. He watched as Jean Wan swam in the water. She was no longer as excited and curious as she was a few days ago. After swimming for a while, she would rest for a while and then continue swimming. After watching for a long time, 2 housekeeping staff knocked on the door at 2 p.m. and came in to clean. Seeing that Mo Jingshan was still in the room, they respectfully said, "Mr. Mo, we're coming in to clean. Are we disturbing you?" Mo Jingshan calmly responded and did not say much. Hearing CEO Mo's response, the 2 men hurriedly began to tidy up the various rooms in the large suite. Hearing the sound of the carpet cleaner, Mo Jingshan slowly shifted his gaze away from the figure in the water. He seemed to have thought of something and turned to ask the housekeeping staff who was wiping in the living room, "Is there any fresh roses in the hotel?" The housekeeping staff carefully recalled. "Yes, Mr. Mo. As you know, this is the only 7-star hotel on this island. Every day, we receive thousands of roses by air. A large portion of them are used to decorate Western food or to place petals on the beds of newlyweds who come here for their honeymoon. Furthermore, they are all very expensive Bulgarian roses." She recalled that back in Jing City, there was a brat who was not afraid of death who gifted Jean Wan a large bouquet of roses. In the end, he threw it into the trash can in front of her. Mo Jingshan calmly asked, "How many roses are there today?" "We haven't used them yet. We usually prepare them in the afternoon and only use them in the evening. Have them send them over again. Bring me the ones we have now." "All right, Mr. Mo." Hearing Mo Jingshan's orders, the housekeeping staff did not dare to delay and immediately went out to make arrangements. Half an hour later, Jean Wan was still practicing holding her breath in the pool. She had checked on the internet and found that for a head injury like hers, there would usually not be much of a problem. At worst, there would only be occasional headaches. If she did not want to have such side effects, she had to keep exercising after her recovery. She could also go swimming frequently to practice holding her breath and train the intensity of oxygen in her brain. This way, her recovery would be faster. As long as she persevered, it would not take long before even this most common side effect would be eradicated. After practicing for a long time, she could hold her breath in the water for 12 to 13 seconds. Every time she came out of the water, she would feel her breathing become smoother. This time, she persevered for an extra second. The moment Jean Wan's head came out of the water, she opened her eyes and was startled. Beads of water flowed down from her eyelashes. She rushed to brush the water from her face and eyes to the side. She saw that the man who was supposed to be resting in the room was standing by the pool. In his hand was a bouquet of tender and beautiful roses. They were red. Especially bright and beautiful red roses. Jean Wan was stunned. "What are you doing with the roses? Don't you like them?" The man looked at her and casually said, "The hotel had them, so I brought them over." Jean Wan, he really did not hide it at all. He said that it was specially flown over from a certain country for her, and that it was fine if he said it just to move her, but in the end, he told her that it was already in the hotel. She remained in the pool. Originally, she wanted to say that she did not want them. However, when she raised her eyes, she saw that the man who had always been calm and collected was holding the bouquet of roses, as though he was devoutly waiting for her to come out of the pool. Jean Wan quickly lowered her head and dived back into the water. Chapter 7:19. When they finally reached the shore, Jean Wan was carried out of the water by Immerse Jingshan. Because she had deliberately hidden in the water for too long, her head hurt. When she finally came out, she swayed in the pool and fell back into the water. This time, she was not prepared to hold her breath and immediately choked on a mouthful of water. Thankfully, Immerse Jingshan's eyes and hands were sharp, and he directly fished her out. However, the moment he came out, Jean Wan was still lying in his arms and coughed several times against the ground. She choked uncomfortably and coughed so badly that her head hurt. Immerse Jingshan was worried that there would be a problem as soon as she recovered. He directly picked up the towel from the recliner and wrapped it around her body. At the same time, he helped her dry her head and lowered his head to check her complexion. "Are you all right? You choked so badly and coughed so hard. Does your head hurt?" Jean Wan nodded. Before she could speak, the man abruptly lifted her up along with the towel. The moment Jean Wan's feet were in the air, she clearly felt the man's concern. Thus, she instantly felt evil. She suddenly raised her hand and moved it up his chest, softly saying, "Shinshin." Immerse Jingshan's arm that was holding her instantly stiffened. Jean Wan could clearly feel the man's body stiffen and the sudden low pressure. How afraid was he that her sobriety today was only a flash in the pan? He was afraid that she would return to her original state of being so muddle-headed that she didn't even know how to fight back when she was bullied. After experiencing so many dangers, life and death, she walked out step by step. At this moment, Jean Wan suddenly felt that she had gone a little too far. In the days after her accident, Immerse Jingshan had endured all that he should and shouldn't have endured. He protected her by his side and never left her side. At this time, if she continued to joke about her own physical condition and recovery, it seemed that she had really gone too far. Jean Wan raised her eyes and secretly glanced at the man's expression. She tugged on the clothes on his chest. When the man felt that her actions were like a spoiled child from a few days ago, he lowered his head to look at her, only to see that Jean Wan was smiling brightly. "I'm joking." The man clearly didn't think that this was an interesting joke. he didn't have the slightest intention of laughing. He lowered his eyes to look at her shoulders and swimsuit that weren't wrapped in a towel, and her hair that was still half wet around her neck. His expression was subtle. "Are you joking?" Jean Wan didn't think much of it. She pursed her lips and said, "Just now, in order to get me out of the water, you threw the roses you were going to give me into the water. Can't I make a joke to ease my regret? Didn't you say you didn't want it?" "I didn't say anything." "Okay, I'll make it up to you on your birthday tomorrow." She didn't say anything more. She leaned her heavy head on his shoulder and let him hold her. She let him hold her and gave a lazy, "Oh." The man carried her out of the pool and back to the hotel. After entering the door, Jean Wan was about to get down from his arms. However, the man directly kicked the door shut. Not only did he not put her down, but Jean Wan felt the man's arm around her waist with great strength. She was then thrown onto the sofa by the man. Her back bumped against the sofa lightly, but it didn't hurt. At the same time, her entire body was pressed against him. She raised her head in a panic, only to be met with the man's lips that were pressing down on her. Mo Jingshan kissed her fiercely, almost wantonly. He nibbled lightly and then moved deeper. Taking advantage of the moment when she was about to faint, he pried open her teeth and attacked without any gentleness. He forcefully invaded every part of her mouth, deeply and lingering. Originally, because she had just woken up and her body couldn't withstand any torment, he didn't plan to do anything to her. But she had the ability to provoke him. "Are you joking, En?" The man hooked her tongue and tangled with it. At the same time, when he let go of her lips, his low, husky voice pressed against her lips. Jean Wan heard the danger in his tone. Her entire nervous senses were drowned by him. His breath, his taste, seemed to penetrate every inch of her skin. She wanted to resist but couldn't. Being kissed by him like this, she finally realized that when the man carried her through this door, he was like a beast that had been suppressed for a long time. Step by step, he tolerated her, let her, doted on her, and protected her. In the end, he was still angered by her. In an instant, it was all based on his own will, and he was unbridled and powerful. He had indeed tolerated for a long time. Since that time, he had promised not to mess around with her without her permission. Later, after being separated for so long, he couldn't bear to frighten her, let alone provoke her. He had endured for a long time. Even when this little woman climbed on top of him again and again when she was unconscious and asked him innocently how they slept together as husband and wife, he had endured all of this. But this little woman was really courageous. As a result, under the forcible catalysis of all the expectations and longing he had accumulated, his desire to let her go surged terrifyingly. In fact, since the moment he pressed against her, Jean Wan could clearly feel his lower body pressing against her. Kissed softly, she called out his name. Her voice was like a weak cat's, Mo Jingshan. The man's voice was hoarse, but it was too sexy. "En. I've just gotten a little better, and you're already so shameless. Can't you just endure for a little longer?" Her seductive yet unconscious voice provoked the man's body to want to go further. He chuckled lowly and huskily. "I haven't endured. Haven't I endured long enough? Then why didn't you take the opportunity when I was climbing on top of you earlier? I was so proactive back then." The man chuckled lowly. Chin Siding said that you only have the IQ of a 10-year-old. Your eyes are too naive. I'm not a pedophile. I really can't bear to do it. Jean Wan, her face turned even redder and hotter. Then what's wrong with my eyes right now? Am I not naive now? If I wasn't naive, I would have stayed in London until I died and never returned to High City. He lowered his head and sucked on her ear, causing her to moan sensitively. The man chuckled lowly, right by her ear. Right now, in your eyes, there's me. Don't flatter yourself. This is just a reflection. I'm just going to swim, and you're running around in front of me. Otherwise, how could there be you? Feeling the man's actions becoming more and more excessive, this undisguised intimacy caused Jean-Wan to blush from her face to her ears. Don't. Chapter 720. Jean-Wan narrowed her eyes at him. You know I'm only 25 years old. There are so many modern women who only get married and have children in their 30s. Why don't I wait another 8 to 10 years? Mo Jingshan chuckled softly. I can wait 8 to 10 years. I don't mind being an old father by then. However, no matter how healthy elder Mo is, I'm afraid he won't be able to wait that long. I have to give him the chance to watch the child grow up, and... Speaking of elder Mo, she thought about how he had yearned for a great-grandson for so many years. In the end, let alone a great-grandson, even his own grandson and granddaughter-in-law were too busy to return to the Mo family to accompany him. Thankfully, the old man was always open-minded and did not make things difficult for her. Otherwise, he would have raised his walking stick and smashed the Yew Garden's gates. Furthermore, it was not that she did not want to have children. It was just that she had never thought that she would have children. If you don't want it, then wait a few more years. There's no rush. The man's hand comforted her head. Or, if she really did not want it, he could accept it. He just did not say this. Jean-Wan's heart moved. Because of what he said, and because of the image of Mo Jingshan holding the child and feeding it with a bottle in front of her mind. When Xia Tian gave birth, her family's little police officer was really a classic example of a tough man with tender emotions. Outside, he was definitely a high-ranking military officer. At home, the scene of him changing the baby's diapers was really shocking, including the scene of him holding the baby and feeding it with a bottle. If that face was Mo Jingshan's, she suddenly looked at Mo Jingshan's face, which was inches away from hers. It was hard to imagine how great Boss Missouri looked when he held the child. If he could treat her so well, after having children, he would most likely become a nanny, right? So when she had a miscarriage, how could his heart not ache? It was just that he was too good at concealing all his emotions and never revealed them. It was just that no one saw the heartache he purposely hid. Perhaps it was because Jean-Wan's expression was too serious, or perhaps it was because he really did not plan on doing anything to her when she had just woken up and did not want to affect her recovery. The man took several deep breaths on her body, kissed her between her breasts, and suddenly released her. Jean-Wan raised her eyes to look at the man who moved away from her. Actually, it's not that I can't give birth. Mo Jingshan's eyes were filled with her reflection. Hearing her words, he smiled mildly and helped her up from the sofa, letting her sit by his side. She was about to tidy up her messy clothes when the man pulled her into his arms. Nuan Nuan. N. The man's voice was so gentle that Jean-Wan couldn't help turning to look at his handsome face. The man slowly said, "Back then, you were pushed out of the car by Su Shui on the Los Angeles highway. Because of the severe fall, you miscarried. Feng Ling said that you went through emergency treatment at that time. Was it very painful?" Jean-Wan's face was calm, and she simply leaned her head on his shoulder. Under the shadow of the light, her long eyelashes fluttered like a fan. No matter how painful it was, it couldn't be more painful than the pain you felt when you used your own body to block that giant truck. I always believed that although you were seriously injured in that car accident, you still survived in the end. It must be our baby who died first. He begged God to let his father accompany his mother for decades more and not be separated by death so early. Or... Jean-Wan raised her hand and casually played with the buttons on his shirt as she had done a few days ago, as if she was used to leaning on his arms even though she had woken up. She said softly. At that time, he just knew that the trajectory of my life needed to be changed and that it was not suitable for him to be born at that time, so he obediently went back first and waited for the right time to meet us again. It must have been very painful. I heard that you had a lot of bleeding in the emergency room, and because you were pregnant, you couldn't have an anesthetic injection. The pain made you faint again and again. Back then, for Jean Wan, it was not just physical pain. She clearly knew that the child could not be saved. While suffering inhuman pain, she also had to worry about Imo Jingshan, who was being rescued at the same time. All the tribulations in life seemed to find her in an instant, as if all the pain she had experienced in her previous life gathered together at that moment and was on the verge of exploding. And after that incident, he also pushed her away with his own hands. It must have been painful. That was why she was unwilling to bow her head even after learning the truth. But no matter how stubborn she was, it was true that she loved him, and it was also true that she could not let go of him. It seemed to be very painful. For a period of time, when I touched my stomach, it was flat, and I was not used to it. But at that time, your parents were worried sick about you, and I didn't want them to feel pressured, so I never said it. I just sent you a text message when I was very depressed, once a day. I've read those text messages. And, you said it. I know. I read every one of them. I know. Seeing that she seemed to have forgiven him and did not want to argue about such a trivial matter, Mo Jingshan held her slightly cold little face and bowed his head. Nuan, I apologize. Jean Wan's hand that was playing with his buttons involuntarily tightened because of his words, and then she grinned. To show your sincerity, you have to spend more time with me on vacation. MN Group has been under Xia Tian's management. If I suddenly go back now, if she knows that I've recovered, I bet she can't wait to throw the company back into my hands. It's rare for me to relax, and I don't want to go back so early. He never expected that this little woman would put forward such a condition. Mo Jingshan's elegant and deep brows moved slightly. That's it. You, the great Mo Jingshan, don't lack anything, and neither do I. For so many years, the only thing we lack is to put down our work and really come out to relax together. Besides, after we got married, we didn't have a honeymoon. Now this is just a compensation for me. Jean Wan said matter-of-factly. The man smiled. All right, it's up to you. Then let's play for another 2 months. Jean Wan said as she calculated the time. First, we'll play here and in Argentina for a few more days, and then we'll pass by the United States. I'll go to New York to watch a fashion show, and then I'll go to Los Angeles to see the place where I studied when I was a teenager, and then I'll go to London to show you the place where I lived in England for 3 years and the old site of my company. And I'll go to Ireland, Greece, and Egypt. In this way, is 2 months not enough? If 2 months is not enough, then 3 months. If 3 months is not enough, then a year. I'll accompany you all the time, N. Is it really okay to let the big boss of Shine Group accompany me on vacation everywhere? Chapter 721. She had been carried out of the pool by Mo Jingshan. Right now, she was still wrapped in a messy bath towel and swimsuit, and her wet hair hung down behind her shoulders. But after all, Jean Wan had just entered the formal recovery period and still needed a little more rest. Swimming was a very physically exhausting exercise. After speaking only a few words, she leaned into his arms, feeling a little sleepy. Mo Jingshan carried her into the bathroom, let her take a hot shower, change into pajamas, and then came out. However, when she came out, he didn't know whether this little woman had gotten used to being in his arms for the past few days or just wanted to cling to him. Mo Jingshan was originally waiting on the sofa for her to come out and help her dry her hair, but when Jean Wan came out, she directly sat on his lap and continued to maintain the posture she had before taking a shower. It seemed that she planned to lean on his arms and sleep. Just like before, many times when she couldn't sleep at night, or was excited or acted coquettishly, he would hold her like this to coax her to sleep. Although she was already awake, it seemed that she had accidentally developed this habit. It was a habit that Immerse was very satisfied with. He stroked the woman's half-dry hair. "Are you going to sleep now? Your hair hasn't been dried yet. I've rubbed it with a dry towel for a long time. It'll be dry in a while. You don't need to dry it." Jinwon leaned her head on his shoulder and closed her eyes. "I'm so sleepy. I want to sleep." The man stroked her head. Seeing that she was really too sleepy, he didn't stop her. Jinwon leaned into his arms in the same position as a few days ago, as if she could fall asleep quickly in this position. He heard the little woman's breathing gradually become even, and she was no longer as nervous as a few days ago when she fell asleep or even occasionally woke up. However, she still habitually grabbed the buttons of his shirt with her hand. This action did not change. Immerse suddenly remembered the year when he had just returned from America, when he found out that Jinwon was the girl who rescued him from the Los Angeles River, and when he met her for the first time in High City. It was at a medium-sized business banquet in Sea City. There seemed to be light in her eyes, and she was cunning and quick-witted. Unlike other young ladies who looked around and compared with others, she was blindly drinking champagne and desserts in the corner. As long as no one was paying attention, she would steal a glass of wine to drink. In front of others, she obviously looked like a noble lady, but behind others, she didn't have any manners at all, but had a unique cuteness. The second time he met her, she didn't know about it. She was kidnapped by the G family's rival in the mall, but at that time, she didn't know what happened. She was blindfolded, tied up, and carried away in an inconspicuous van. He sent someone to rescue her and rescued her from the van before she was almost taken out of High City's highway. However, she, who was only 19 years old at that time, was already frightened. It was not convenient for Immerse to show up, so he didn't remove the black cloth from her head. She didn't know whether the people who took her away were other kidnappers or someone else. Even when he carried her to the car and patted her comfortingly, she still tensed up in his arms nervously. The fear of a little woman made her originally soft body tense as if every part of it was about to break. In the end, he couldn't bear it and said lightly, "I was sent by your father to rescue you. It's not convenient for me to show up, but I'll send you back to the G family immediately. Don't be afraid." After saying these words, he didn't know if it was because his tone was too calm, but he could clearly feel her body gradually relax. However, after relaxing, she couldn't help trembling. Her hand inadvertently patted on the buttons of his shirt and tightly gripped them, as if this action could give her a sense of security. Later, even when he sent her back to the police station near the G family, she still didn't say a word. After all, it was not convenient for him to show up at the G family's home and could only send her back through the police. He also had to report her kidnapping to the police station. Otherwise, the G family was likely to encounter the revenge of this kind of business enemy. Back then, why did he insist on marrying Jinwon? When he learned that the young lady was kind to him, he could have used other methods to repay her. He could have also helped the G family's business rise to a higher level, allowing her family and her life to be happier. However, when his grandfather suggested the marriage between the two families, he only thought that it was fated. Furthermore, he didn't hate Jinwon. In fact, he had always remembered the fact that the young lady didn't even know the difference between a first kiss and artificial respiration. If they were fated to be together, he didn't mind marrying her and teaching her well. However, when he truly made up his mind to make her Mrs. Immerse, it was this small incident that she might have long forgotten, or perhaps even didn't know it had anything to do with him. At that time, Jean Wan's entire body had shrunk into his embrace, trembling. Her hands had unconsciously gripped him tightly, holding on to him helplessly and stubbornly, refusing to let anyone hear her cries. Perhaps it was because he suddenly wanted to hold her in his arms to comfort her that he changed from letting nature take its course to personally opening the Mo family's doors to welcome her into his life. Jean Wan had really fallen asleep. Mo Jingshan placed her down gently and stood up to bring the hairdryer to gently dry her hair. He then waited for her to adjust to the heat on her head and blow dry all her hair before carrying her back to bed to sleep. The next day, Jean Wan's birthday. The moment she opened her eyes, she realized that she was 25 years old. The moment she opened her eyes, she smelled the fragrance of noodles. Jean Wan got up and went out. As expected, she saw that Boss Missouri had prepared breakfast for her. It was a simple bowl of egg noodles, which could also be called longevity noodles. On this island, although there were ordinary ingredients, there weren't many of them. There weren't many that tasted good either. Although it was simple, the smell was very fragrant. She couldn't help but walk over. She did not stand on ceremony and picked up the noodles to eat as she said, "Usually, I always want to eat seafood. In the end, after coming to this island for a few days, I realized that eating too much of it makes me sick. It's not even as appetizing as these simple dishes. If this was a bowl of seafood noodles that I made, would you still eat it?" the man asked in return. Jean Wan took a bite of the poached egg in the noodles while thinking carefully. She replied, "Of course I would eat it. So, the only problem lies in whether or not I personally made the food." The man smiled at her. "Eat it. I'll accompany you out after you're full." It seemed like this was indeed the problem. You're tuning into the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.